Hey guys, tonight you find yourself beneath the shadow of a high stone gatehouse, where the walls sweat with old damp and the morning has not yet decided whether it wishes to be night a little longer. The air tastes of river mist and wood smoke. Cold stone presses its chill through the soles of your boots. Damp straw crackles underfoot, and somewhere overhead smoke drifts in lazy ribbons among soot-black rafters that have seen more winters than anyone now living can count. A bell sounds far off in the dark, perhaps from a priory on the far road, perhaps from some smaller chapel huddled among bare trees, and its note comes thin through the mist like a thread drawn through cloth. Beneath it all hangs the smell of horse breath, wet wool, old iron, and mud, which, to be fair, is the true perfume of medieval employment. Medieval travel brochures really oversold this experience. You stand wrapped in a fur-lined cloak that does very little to impress the cold, and you rub your hands together while torchlight spits beside the gate. Your fingers already ache. The castle behind you sleeps in layers, lord and lady in their chambers, servants in the corners of warmer rooms, dogs curled by kitchens, a sleepy priest somewhere dreaming beside his saints. But here at the threshold, where the world outside presses against the world within, sleep ends early and without apology. You probably would not last a week out here, though in fairness neither would most people who like warm beds, soft bread, and not having to wrestle frozen iron before sunrise. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while the watchfire sinks to red embers and the first crows begin to stir, feel free to comment your location and local time, so that somewhere across this soft dark world another quiet soul may know who is awake with them. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You draw a breath that smokes pale before your face and turn toward the gate itself. Your gate, or near enough, though the lord whose banner hangs above it would certainly remind you that the oak, the iron, the chains, the bridge, the ditch, the toll chest, and probably the damp also belong to him. The great doors loom shut, heavy planks banded in black iron, scarred by weather and use rather than by the sort of glorious assault minstrels prefer to sing about. In truth, most days a castle gatekeeper does not repel armies. Most days you listen to cartwheels complain, argue over market dues, smell fish before you see it, and decide whether a stranger's smile looks honest or simply cold. The watchman who shared the deepest part of the night with you stands beside the brazier, nodding as if he has become part of the wall. His beard is silvered with frost. In one gloved hand he holds a ring of iron keys large enough to seem symbolic, as though a gatekeeper must rattle like a jailer in every proper tale. Yet the keys matter, iron keys, some long as a hand, some crooked and dark with age, open little doors within thick doors, chest locks, side posterns, bolt chambers hidden in the wall. A castle is full of things meant to stay shut until the right hour. He passes the ring to you with the solemnity of a priest handing over relics, then ruins the moment by yawning straight into his sleeve. "Quiet one," he mutters, meaning the night, not you. That can be good, though no one can quite agree whether a quiet night means the saints kept watch or whether trouble simply chose another road. Those who tell the tale never fully agree. Some swear that if an owl calls 3 times from the outer wall before dawn, travellers will arrive in a foul mood and with worse paperwork. Others insist the surest sign is when the gate dog refuses scraps and stares at the road. Medieval people are wonderfully committed to finding patterns in absolutely everything except the weather, which remains rude regardless. You glance down and there indeed lies the dog. a rangy brown creature with one torn ear and the calm entitlement of an animal who lives among soldiers. He sleeps by the warmest side of the brazier, opening one eye only long enough to judge you unimportant. Good. If he barked now, people would mutter. The castle begins to wake behind you in tiny sounds. A pail knocks somewhere in the yard. A woman coughs. A stable lad swears softly after stepping in something educational. From a high-slit window a weak orange light appears, then another. Up on the wall walk, a figure wrapped in wool crosses between torches, spear tucked under one arm, moving with the slow certainty of someone who knows every stair in darkness. Beneath your boots the gate passage smells of wet rushes laid down days ago on the stone floor to catch muck and soften steps. They are already trodden flat and hold the odours of boot leather, horse dung, ale, and rain. Fresh rushes would be nicer, but castles, like people, usually settle for good enough. You squat by the brazier and hold the largest key toward the heat just long enough to steal some warmth into the metal before using it. The lock set into the wicket door hates winter. The little door is cut into one leaf of the great gate, meant for admitting one person at a time when the full doors stay barred. Your hand closes around the key's iron stem. It bites the skin anyway. You fit it to the lock, twist hard, and feel resistance. Then the grudging shift within. Something inside the oak clunks like an old knee. Medieval engineering is reliable in the same way medieval mules are reliable eventually, and with opinions. When the wicket opens inward, a blade of colder air slips through, along with river damp and the faint smell of the outer ditch. You peer out into a world made almost entirely of grey. The drawbridge still lies up, its chains thick with dew that is almost frost. Beyond it the road is scarcely visible, only a smear leading toward darker shapes of trees and the pale huddle of huts belonging to folk who prefer the Lord's walls nearby, even if they grumble at his taxes. A small shrine stands by the roadside where travellers sometimes leave wax drippings, little scraps of ribbon or bent pilgrim badges in hopes of safe passage. Even now, it is hard to tell whether the comfort comes from the saint carved there or simply from having somewhere to stop and ask for luck. You step out onto the inner platform and begin the morning sequence that has likely been done in some version for generations. First, the inspection bolt sockets, hinges, chain links, the grooves where the bridge lifts, the pegs that hold, the winch housing beneath its cover. A gatekeeper's life depends on habits, not courage, not speeches, not dramatic instincts. Habits. You check what was checked yesterday because if you do not, today becomes memorable for all the wrong reasons. One torch has burned low. You snuff it against the wall and replace it with another from the rack. It's beeswax, dearer and sweeter than common tallow, reserved for places close to the Lord's route through the castle. This one smells faintly of honey when it warms, a gentle richness amid smoke and iron. Somewhere in the chapel the priest will soon light altar candles of the same kind, murmuring Latin over saints' relics in their boxes while you coax wood and chain into motion. Both labours. In their own way, are acts of keeping order. The older watchman joins you at the bridge mechanism, together fitting shoulder and hand to the bar. The chains groan as you release the first catch. The bridge does not fall so much as descend with slow, unwilling dignity, each link speaking in a deep iron complaint. Frost flakes from the wood, when at last the far end settles over the ditch with a dull thud. The sound rolls outward into the mist. It is the day's first invitation. The castle is open. In the cautious medieval sense of the word open, which still includes suspicion, fees, and several opportunities to be turned away. A second bell rings now, clearer, from within the castle chapel, prime or near enough. Time here comes in bells more than in numbers. The monastery across the valley, if the wind favours you, answers a little later, and the rhythm of the world seems stitched by sound bells for prayer, bells for labour, bells for meals, bells for alarm. A man who cannot read the sky or count the hour may still know his life by listening. You stamp feeling back into your feet and watch the road. At first it gives you nothing. Then, slowly, movement emerges from the grey. A cart, perhaps. One figure walking ahead. Something on the shafts that might be bundles of kindling or sacks of oats. The day begins not with fanfare, but with shapes becoming people. Behind you, in the yard, servants cross carrying buckets. A sleepy kitchen boy hurries past with a basket of coarse bread. The smell reaches you briefly, warm and sharp enough to make your stomach notice itself. Soon there will be pottage in a pot somewhere, and ale watered for morning, and perhaps a scrap of smoked fish if fortune smiles. But not yet. First come the road, the faces, the questions. The little judgments by which a castle keeps itself from becoming merely a shelter with expensive walls. The dog rises, stretches so extravagantly it seems theatrical, then pads to your side and stares into the mist as if he personally arranged the arrivals. You rest one hand on the cold wood of the gate and wait with him. The first travellers of the morning approach slowly over the damp bridge, and the old stone around you holds its breath with practised patience. The cart that appeared first through the grey of morning passes at last beneath the arch, and with it the day truly begins to gather its weight around you. The driver is a narrow man wrapped in a patched wool hood, his beard wet with mist, his mule looking older than the road itself. He offers the sort of nod people give gatekeepers when they are unsure whether friendliness lowers fees or raises suspicion. You return the sort of nod gatekeepers give back, which says that you have seen many men, many carts, and many attempts to explain away taxable goods beneath a blanket of straw. By the time he clatters through, the air has lightened from black to pewter. Cold remains in the stones, tucked into their cracks and corners like something alive. The great oak leaves of the gate stand open just enough for morning traffic, and in that half-open posture they look less like a heroic fortress and more like a pair of old shoulders reluctantly preparing for work. That, you discover, is much of a gatekeeper's life, coaxing old shoulders, old hinges, old locks, old habits, and sometimes old men into one more day of service. You set down the toll chest on its stool inside the passage, then turn to the gate itself because there is always the gate itself. People imagine this duty as a matter of watchfulness, and it is. But they forget that watchfulness depends on maintenance. A gate that cannot shut is merely a decorative opinion. A bar that sticks at dusk can become the most memorable feature of your evening. So before the flow of travellers grows steady, you make your round of the wood and iron. You run your gloved hand over the inner face of the left door. The oak planks are thick as a man's forearm, darkened by years of rain, frost, smoke, and hands. Here and there the grain has risen in ridges where damp has swelled it, and summer heat has shrunk it again. The iron straps laid across it are black and pitted, each stud head worn smooth with age. In places old tar still clings in glossy streaks where some careful soul sealed a crack against wet. In other places there are fresh scrapes from carts that came through too closely, their drivers swearing innocence while their axles told another tale. You squat to inspect the lower hinge. A gatekeeper learns early that trouble begins near the ground, where mud creeps, water settles, and everything rusts out of pure resentment. The hinge pin shows orange at its edge. Not enough to fear, enough to offend. You reach for the little pot of grease kept on the ledge nearby, thick with tallow and smelling faintly of sheep and ash. It is not elegant work. Nothing about medieval upkeep is elegant. You smear the grease into the joint with a scrap of rag and work the hinge back and forth until the worst of the stiffness eases. There is a kind of intimacy in maintaining a gait. You come to know which piece groans first in rain, which bolt prefers a sharp shove rather than a steady push, which crack will widen if you ignore it through one more wet week. Some swear that oak doors absorb not only rainwater but temper, and that a gate long neglected becomes mean in winter, jamming not from swelling alone but from a sort of offended spirit in the grain. Others say you should tuck a sliver of rowan wood above the lintel to keep spiteful forces from settling in the hinge side. Even now, it is hard to tell whether these customs are superstition or simply the medieval method of turning practical concerns into memorable stories. If a man tells you the hinge sticks because demons favour damp timber, you may laugh, but you will still remember to oil it. The older watchman, who has not yet gone to his bed, leans on the wall and watches you with the charitable expression of one who has already made these mistakes himself. "Top bar next," he says. You look up to the great beam resting on its brackets inside the passage. It is a massive length of hardwood used to secure the gate by night, dark with hand grease where men lift it, polished smooth in places by years of use. It smells faintly resinous where the grain still speaks beneath old smoke. Getting that beam into place after dark requires rhythm more than strength, and a little shared resentment helps too. This morning you inspect its ends, the sockets where it settles, the wedges that stop it shifting loose when the wind rattles the doors. A splinter catches your palm. Of course it does. Medieval workplaces rarely miss a chance to remind you they are tactile. At the side postern, the small door built into the wall for quiet comings and goings, the latch has loosened. You tighten the peg with the butt of your knife. Nearby hang the chains used for the drawbridge, their links thick and cold as river stones. One link carries an old repair a band hammered over a floor long ago by the castle smith. You remember him saying yesterday that he would replace it before midsummer if the Lord Steward can be persuaded that metal now is cheaper than disaster later. This is one of the grand traditions of fortress management, second only to blaming weather. Everyone agrees a repair is necessary, but only after another man pays for it. By now the castle is properly woken. From the kitchens comes the smell of oat pottage and singed bread. A stable boy leads out 2 horses, both breathing steam into the yard as if they are tiny dragons hired at insulting wages. Somewhere above, shutters bang open. A maid empties stale rushes from a basket and replaces them with fresh-cut ones in the chamber over the passage, and the scent of green stems briefly softens the harsher odours of old mud and damp stone. Rushes on floors make everything slightly more bearable, though they also hide crumbs, dropped pins, and, in less noble households, mysteries best left unnamed. The first proper line of mourning gathers a brewer's servant with casks strapped on a cart, 2 women carrying baskets of eggs padded with straw, a boy leading 3 geese who seem personally offended by authority, and a thin pilgrim with a scallop badge sewn to his cap. You hold up a hand for patience while you finish checking the locking hooks. A gatekeeper quickly learns that everyone believes their business should go first because it is urgent, holy, perishable, or connected to someone important. The geese would probably claim the same if given speech. You test the wicket again, opening and closing it until the latch catches true. The old wood drags slightly against the threshold. You fetch a small adze and shave away a damp swollen curl from the lower edge. Fresh pale wood appears like bone beneath the darker outer grain. The scent rises clean and sharp, and for a moment the whole gatehouse smells like a carpenter's shop instead of a wet fortification. That smell never lasts. Nothing pure survives long beside a road. The pilgrim coughs politely. You glance at his badge again, shell-shaped and worn bright at one edge. Whether he has truly come from a distant shrine or bought it from a roadside hawker is difficult to tell. Pilgrim badges travel widely, and honesty less so. No one can quite agree whether relics and tokens protect a traveller by saintly favour, or by discouraging thieves who would rather not risk offending heaven. Either way, men wear them, women kiss them, and gatekeepers inspect them with narrowed eyes while wondering whether holiness exempts anyone from queuing. It does not. You finish with the adze and straighten, flexing stiff fingers. The grey light outside has turned silvery now, and the bridge boards gleam with damp. From the chapel within the castle comes the murmur of morning prayer, thin through stone. Bells have marked the hour. Servants have begun their errands. Smoke has risen. And still you remain with wood, iron, and questions. It is honest work, if rarely romantic. No minstrel sings of a well-greased hinge, though perhaps they should. Kingdoms, after all, depend quite as much on things closing properly as on banners waving dramatically. The older watchman snorts as if hearing your thought. "Mind the lower bolt tonight," he says. "It sticks in wet weather." You nod. Of course it does. There is always a lower bolt. There is always wet weather. There's always one more piece of oak or iron that behaves as though it personally resents history. At last you turn fully to the line awaiting entry. Coins will soon clink into the chest. Questions will begin. Names, origins, destinations, goods, excuses. But before all that, you rest your palm once more against the gate leaf nearest you. The timber holds the night's cold still, though less fiercely now. Beneath the roughness you feel its steadiness, the long patience of something built not for glory but for repetition. Open at dawn, shut at dusk, hold in peace, hold out trouble, and complain in every season. It is a simple duty until you are the one responsible for it, and then suddenly every hinge sounds personal. You step back into the passage, set the adze aside, and gesture for the waiting travellers to come forward one by one beneath the arch, while above you the chains, the oak, and the old iron settle into mourning with the weary obedience of things that have survived by enduring. Morning grows more definite by the moment, though the sun itself still hides behind a bank of pale cloud beyond the eastern woods, and the light that enters the gate passage is the sort that shows every damp mark on stone and every loose thread in a wool sleeve. You stand beside the open leaf of the gate with the toll chest near your hip, and the dog settled once more by the warmer wall, pretending indifference while missing absolutely nothing. Before you stretches the slow-moving line of those who wish to pass under your arch and into the castle's keeping, or at least into the yard beneath its lord's authority for an hour or two. This, more than chains or beams or the lifting of the bridge, is the heart of the morning faces at first light, each one carrying a purpose, a worry, a little mud, and perhaps a lie. The brewer's servant comes first, because men carrying ale always move with a confidence bordering on theology. His cart wheels rumble over the damp boards of the drawbridge, and the casks behind him smell faintly yeasty even through their staves. He's broad across the shoulders, red-eared from cold, with hands that look permanently shaped for lifting barrels. His hood is decent wool, but his boots have been patched so often they resemble arguments rather than footwear. "Mourning," he says. "You have learned that there are many kinds of mourning. There is the cheerful mourning of a man with no fees due. There is the careful mourning of someone hiding chickens under a blanket. And there is the neutral mourning of a servant who knows that if he speaks too brightly, he may be asked one question too many. This man gives you the third kind. You ask his business anyway. He tells you the brewery in the lower village has sent fresh ale for the hall and weak small beer for the kitchen workers. You ask whose order. He names the steward. You glance at the chalk mark on one cask head, the little symbol used by the castle storehouse to show expected delivery. That helps. Marks matter. So do the details people forget when they invent stories too quickly. A false traveller may learn the Lord's name, perhaps even the steward's. But he often guesses wrong about whether the kitchen prefers salted herring this week or fresh river pike, or whether the abbey up the road sent onions last market day. Small truths guard big doors. You nod him through, and he inclines his head with the relief of a man who would rather wrestle barrels than suspicion. The dog opens one eye, judges the brewer harmless, and closes it again. An excellent assistant, though impossible to pay fairly. Next come the two women with egg baskets. They carry them balanced in the crooks of their elbows, padded with straw, the eggs pale as little moons in the soft light. Their skirts are damp at the hem. One has a blue wool kerchief tied close over her hair, the other a faded brown one, and both wear the expression of women who have been awake longer than most respectable churchmen. They smell of hens, cold air, and wood smoke. Honest smells, usually. Market, you ask. And the cookhouse, says the taller one, if their last order still stands. You ask how many dozens. She answers without pause. The shorter woman adds that the last wet week made the hens lazy. This is precisely the kind of detail liars either overdo or avoid. She sounds merely annoyed, which is often the most convincing form of truth. Some swear that eggs carried on a Friday morning break more easily if the carrier has quarrelled before dawn, and others insist a charm of knotted thread tucked into the basket keeps witches from souring yolks at a distance. No one ever agrees where such notions begin. Yet even practical women mutter a blessing over fragile goods, because the road is rough, buyers are demanding, and heaven may as well be invited to help. You wave them inward. As they pass, one asks whether the castle kitchens are paying in coin today, or in a tally to be settled later. You tell her that depends on whether the steward has eaten already. She laughs once, sharply, and goes on. That is one of the little gifts of gatekeeping. You're not powerful enough to be feared by everyone, but just powerful enough to hear what people really think of those above you. Then the boy with the geese arrives, and you suspect at once that your patience will be tested before terse. He is perhaps 12, perhaps 14, in the medieval way of children who are aged more by labour than by counting. His nose runs. His cap has slipped over one ear. He grips the cords tied around the geese's legs with more optimism than control. The birds object loudly to the arrangement, necks weaving like pale, offended serpents. Whose birds, you ask? My uncle's. Everyone's uncle owns something at a gate. You ask which uncle? He blinks. Ah, there it is. Oswin, he says at last. There are 3 Oswins in the lower village, the one with the pigs. That narrows matters somewhat, though not enough to satisfy you. You ask what the geese are for. He says sale. You ask where. He says castle kitchens if they'll have them. Market square if not. Sensible answer. One goose begins to beat its wings indignantly, scattering a spray of damp feathers and causing the dog to lift his head in profound moral disappointment. You lean closer. How many? The boy looks down, counts badly, starts over, and arrives at the correct number only because the geese, in their rage, hold still long enough to be seen. That, strangely, reassures you. A coached liar usually knows his number faster than that. A real village boy handling his uncle's foul-tempered birds in the cold often does not. You let him pass, though not before warning him to keep the geese clear of the chapel path unless he wants God introduced to this morning's noise. A few travellers later comes the pilgrim. He's been waiting with thin shoulders tucked inward against the chill, hands folded under opposite sleeves. Up close he seems even leaner, all cheekbone and patience, with a short beard beaded faintly with mist. His cloak is not new, but it is well mended. On his cap sits the scallop badge you noticed earlier, and at his neck hangs a little lead token stamped with a saint whose face is worn almost smooth. Around his staff someone has tied a strip of faded red cloth, perhaps as a remembrance, perhaps to catch the eye, perhaps because some old woman once told him red turns away fever. Medieval medicine is, at times, deeply committed to colour theory. He bows slightly and waits for you to speak first. That in itself tells you something. Men who know gates often let the keeper set the pace, from where you ask. He names a shrine 2 counties away, famous for a martyr whose finger bone, according to the most enthusiastic tales, cured lameness, eased childbirth, and once frightened a storm into changing direction. Some swear the relic sweats before bad weather. Some swear it glows on saints' days. Even now, it is hard to tell whether the shrine's reputation rests on miracles, good storytelling, or a very capable prior who understands donation patterns. Still, pilgrims come. Their boots do not lie, even when their mouths do. You look at his boots. Cracked leather, fresh mud in the seams, not the same colour as the road near your castle. One lace repaired with cord instead of thong, a real walker's boots. You ask where he goes now. He says onward to another chapel where he has vowed a candle for his sister's health. That kind of vow is common enough. A sick sister, a difficult birth, a failed harvest, a cough that lingers through winter. People tie hope to roads when herbs and prayers at home seem too small. Any goods to sell, you ask? Only prayers, he says. A dangerous answer at some gates, but he says it softly, almost apologetically. There is a worn humility to him that does not feel performed. You check his satchel anyway. Inside are coarse bread, an onion, a wax stub, a small wooden comb, and a folded parchment letter sealed once but now opened and tucked back carefully. Letters matter. Literacy travels strangely in this world. A man may own no spoon worth naming and still carry words from an ink-stained scribe that weigh more than silver in the right place. What is the letter for the chaplain here, if he is the same man still? You consider, the castle chaplain does receive letters from clerics and houses up the road. The pilgrim's voice holds no cleverness, only weariness, and the sort of hopeful caution one sees in men asking shelter without quite asking it. You send a page to inquire whether the chaplain expects correspondence. While you wait, the pilgrim stands quiet as a post, eyes lowered. He does not fill the silence, which is to his credit. Liars often fear silence more than God. Around him the line continues to thicken. A cooper with hoops stacked in his cart, a widow bringing herbs tied in little bunches sage, pennyroyal, feverfew, and something bitter for the steward's stomach if rumour speaks true, a mason's labourer carrying chisels wrapped in cloth, a pair of young men with a sack of smoked fish whose scent enters the gate several moments before they do. You question each in turn, and with each you build the morning out of tiny judgments. Faces become your weather. A man looking past you rather than at you. A woman too eager with names she should not know. A trader whose smile arrives before his explanation. A servant who uses the right complaint about the right kitchen maid. a tanner who smells exactly as offensively sincere as expected, a novice from the nearby priory whose hands are still too soft for field work and too ink-stained for lying about it. You notice accents, mud types, the wear on shoes, whether a cloak is classed with pewter, bone, or carved wood. A castle gatekeeper must, in a quiet way, become part gossip, part accountant, part shepherd dog, part priest hearing half confessions from men who never quite kneel. At last the page returns, breathless from stairs, to say the chaplain will take the letter and the pilgrim may wait by the inner chapel wall until called. You nod him through. Relief flickers across his face, quickly hidden. He thanks you with a gravity that feels older than his years. As he passes beneath the arch, you watch him for a moment longer than necessary, not because you mistrust him now, but because every face lingers a little once it enters. That is the strange duty of a threshold. Out on the road, people belong to weather, hunger, luck, and their own poor decisions. Under your gate, even briefly, they fall into your memory, and the morning keeps coming, one cautious face at a time. The line at the gate never quite ends, it only changes shape. By the time the pilgrim has been led off toward the chapel wall, and the geese have been persuaded, noisily and without dignity, into the yard beyond, the morning has settled into that steady medieval rhythm in which everyone is busy. No one is comfortable, and money changes hands with the reluctant intimacy of an unpleasant handshake. The sky above the battlements remains low and grey, a lid of cloud pressing soft damp into cloaks and caps, and the stones of the passage hold the chill so stubbornly that even standing near the brazier feels like negotiating with winter rather than defeating it. You set the toll chest more squarely on its stool and lift the lid. Inside lie stacks of small coins, tally sticks, bits of parchment, and the steward's wax-marked notes from the day before. A few silver pennies glimmer among a greater number of smaller pieces, clipped coins, worn farthings, foreign bits of stamped metal that someone will eventually try to argue should count at full value because silver is silver. Is it not? And because the road from wherever they came has been very long indeed. In your experience, the length of a man's road increases in direct proportion to the amount of toll he hopes not to pay. A carter with a load of onions comes first. The smell arrives before the cart does, sharp and earthy, enough to make your eyes prickle. The onions are bundled in braided ropes and heaped under a rough cloth. The mule pulling them looks offended by commerce in general. "Market goods," the carter says, as though you might have mistaken them for a choir. You ask where from. He names a village beyond the river crossing. You ask how many sacks, and he tells you with the solemn grief of a man counting children. You check the steward's board hanging on the wall nearby, where dues for market entry have been scratched in charcoal, one rate for a cart, one for beasts, one for stalls, another if their wares are to remain overnight under the Lord's protection. There are always layers. Medieval administration has an almost devotional faith in little distinctions. He fishes in his purse and begins placing coins into your palm one by one. They are cold, damp, and smell faintly of skin, leather, and old metal. One is clipped at the edge. You turn it between finger and thumb. "It was whole yesterday," he says, much too quickly. "A miracle," you reply, "and before breakfast." He grunts in a way that might be laughter if he were warmer. You set the clipped coin aside and tell him the steward's clerk can argue its value with him later if he likes, though neither of you truly likes that prospect. The clerk, a narrow fellow with ink on 3 fingers at all times, possesses the rare talent of making a single penny feel like a theological dispute. The carter sighs, adds another coin to the pile, and is allowed through. Trade, like salvation, often requires supplementary payment. After him comes a woman with dyed wool bundled beneath wax cloth. Even in the grey light, you glimpse deep blue and rusty red through a fold where the covering has slipped. Her hands are stained faintly at the nails, and there is a smell about the bundles of wet fleece, lye, and the sharp tang of madder root. She means to sell to the cloth men in the outer market, or perhaps to the castle itself, if some mistress of stores has taken sudden interest in colour. Dull weather makes bright cloth seem twice as precious. You ask the fee. She knows it already and hands over exact coin without complaint, which makes you suspicious only because so few people do anything exact without a motive. You have been here before, you say, more times than your dog has fleas. The dog, hearing himself referenced, opens one eye and looks insulted by the allegation rather than by the arithmetic. You waver through. Experienced traders always move with a kind of relaxed impatience, as though castle gates are merely another inconvenience between their goods and their buyers. They know the rates, the moods, the best hour to arrive, and which guard can be softened by gossip about the steward's gout. You're not that guard, at least not before noon. A pair of fishermen follow, carrying smoked eels strung on rods across their shoulders. The fish are brown gold and glossy with oil, their scent strong enough to claim the entire archway. One man has tied a sprig of rosemary near the load, whether to sweeten the smell or as a little charm against spoilage, you cannot tell. Some swear rosemary keeps rot and ill luck equally at bay. Others say fish offered for sale on a saint's feast should be touched to iron before market, lest envy sour them. No one can quite agree whether such habits come from religion, trade wisdom, or old grandmothers who like to sound unquestionable. Still, the sprig is there, and the men touch the gate's iron strap in passing almost without thinking. You inspect the load, count, name the toll, and receive a mixed handful of coins and one token carved from bone, marked with the sign of a riverside manor that settles accounts monthly. Manor courts love tokens. They let men postpone paying coin while still feeling official, which is a pleasure known in every century. You note the token on a wax tablet, scratch the amount owed, and let the fisherman move on, leaving behind a wake of smoke, salt, and the sea's distant cousin, the river. As the morning advances, the gate passage becomes its own small court of negotiation. Merchants argue that their cartwheels barely touch the bridge, and therefore should not count as full entry. A cobbler's apprentice insists the leather he carries is commissioned work, not market stock, though he says this while glancing directly at a draper's stall being raised inside the yard. A widow with 2 baskets of leeks produces exact fee in silence, and looks at you with such exhausted dignity that you nearly pay it for her yourself, though the steward would probably smell leniency at 20 paces and appear from a crack in the stone. The steward himself does not appear, but his presence clings to every transaction. His rules are everywhere on the board, in the chest, in the tally, in the nervous way people double-check their sums before stepping under the arch. He is a man built, it seems, entirely from ledgers, boiled onions, and disapproval. Yet even he cannot watch every coin, which is why you stand here, fingers numb, listening to excuses unfold like damp laundry. One merchant, a seller of wooden bowls and spoons, attempts the oldest trick on the road by draping a cloth over the rear of his cart in hopes you will count only what stands plainly visible. What lies under there, you ask? Nothing worth taxing. Remarkable, you say. Then you will not mind showing me. He hesitates just long enough to convict himself, then lifts the cloth to reveal a neat stack of carved trenchers and 2 small casks of honey. The honey was the true hiding place. Honey draws higher fee because it draws higher price, and because everyone knows bees perform a form of labour bordering on the holy. Beeswax candles burn cleaner, honey sweetens medicine, and mead makes poor decisions seem festive. Monasteries keep bees with more seriousness than some knights keep vows. The merchant gives you a pained smile. I forgot the casks. In a cart you packed yourself. The road shakes memory loose, a dangerous road. He pays. They always pay eventually, though each acts as if the coin has been cut from his own rib. You scratch marks onto the tally stick, 1 notch for entry, another for declared goods, a third for the hidden casks. Tally sticks are ungainly little miracles, split wood bearing matching cuts so that lord and trader each keep proof of the account. Ink fades, parchment tears, clerks lie, but a stick notched and split has a stubborn honesty to it, even now. It is hard to tell whether medieval people trust wood because it is simple, or because it is old enough to feel wise. A light rain begins, so fine at first it seems only a thickening of the air. Then droplets gather on the bridge chains, on the dog's whiskers, on the wool sleeves of those still waiting. Cloaks darken, hoods go up. The gate passage fills with the smell of wet wool, wet leather, damp hay from a cart of fodder, and the fresh metallic scent that rises when rain finds old iron. The brazier hisses softly as water touches its rim. One by one, voices lower. Rain has a way of humbling dispute, if only because everyone wishes to finish arguing and get under a roof. You pull the chest a little farther in from the arch and continue. A tinker pays in mixed coin and offers, unsolicited, to sharpen the kitchen knives for half fee if you allow him through without counting his pans. A priest's servant brings lamp oil in sealed jars and presents a scrap of parchment stamped with the priory mark. A baker's boy arrives carrying trenchers stacked taller than his patients, and one slips, skidding into the wet rushes with a slap that sounds like ruined dignity. You help him gather them while he mutters that St. Lawrence, who ought to understand kitchens, clearly is not paying attention today. Somewhere behind you, from the inner ward, a bell rings again, and servants quicken their pace. Market stalls are being set in order. Buyers are beginning to arrive. The castle's day opens wider, and you stand where it narrows first, measuring entrance in pennies, tokens, and glances. No one sings of this, of course. Bards prefer tournaments, ambushes, and banners in the wind. They do not linger over clipped coin, onion carts, tally marks, and the cold patience required to say that fee is still due 14 times before midday. Yet this, too, is lordship made real. Walls cost stone, but authority costs counting. The rain thickens slightly, silvering the world beyond the bridge. A hooded figure farther back in line lifts a bundle closer beneath his arm and waits without complaint, while nearer at hand a man with market apples tries to pass off a foreign coin that bears a king's profile worn almost smooth. You turn it over in your hand, feel the worn edge with your thumb, and give him the look that means the morning is not going to become easier for either of you. He sighs. The dog sighs with him. Somewhere above, water drips steadily from the eaves, and still the coins keep coming, cold as the day, passing from wet hands into yours while the grey sky presses lower and the business of the world shuffles patiently beneath your gate. The rain settles in as though it has signed a lease on the day. By midday the sky is a single unbroken sheet of pewter, and the world beyond the drawbridge has blurred into softened outlines, bare trees fading into mist, the road gone slick and dark, the ditch below the bridge holding a thin glaze of ripples where drops stitch the water without pause. Those who are already inside hurry along the edges of walls and under jutting roofs, heads bent, cloaks drawn close, while those still arriving come at the gate with the resigned faces of people who know that weather and lordship are two burdens best endured rather than argued with. You shift the toll chest farther from the arch and retreat a few steps into the gate passage, where the stone keeps out the worst of the rain, though not the damp. Nothing keeps out the damp. It creeps into wool, into leather, into the seams of gloves, into the straw scattered over the floor, into your very bones with the patient confidence of something that has all day to win. The rushes beneath your boots are flattened and fragrant in a tired way now, giving off the smell of green things bruised under constant use. The brazier glows beside the wall, its heat never quite enough, but enough to gather people near it with the instinctive courtesy of the cold. A cart loaded with turnips rattles through after paying its due, the driver muttering thanks to every saint associated with roofs. Then the line thins. Rain does that. It slows trade, bunches errands, and convinces many sensible people to remain where they are until the heavens grow bored. For a little while, at least. The gate shifts from busy threshold to sheltered pause, and the mood inside the passage changes with it. Voices lower, movements ease. The castle seems to breathe inward. You stand beneath the arch and watch curtains of rain sway beyond the bridge. The dog, who earlier made a ceremony of ignoring everyone, has now promoted himself to the warmest place beside the brazier and sleeps there with the moral certainty of a creature who has never paid toll in his life. Water drips from the edge of your cloak onto the stones. Above you, from the small chamber over the passage, comes the muted thump of someone moving a stool and the rustle of wool blankets being shaken near the fire. Even in a castle, midday in rain makes everyone think of warmth, bread, and sitting down somewhere that does not smell of horses. A kitchen servant appears with a covered pot and a basket, shoulders hunched beneath a hood darkened almost black by wet. She's broad-faced, practical, and in no mood for ceremony. For the gate, she says, as if bestowing royal favour. Inside the basket lies coarse bread still warm enough to steam when torn, one small round loaf darker with rye, and a wedge of hard cheese wrapped in cloth. In the pot is pottage, thick with barley, onions, and a few soft shreds of leek, with the ghost of smoked fish hovering somewhere in its scent. It is not glamorous food, but then neither is most medieval comfort. Comfort here means hot, filling, and unlikely to kill you before Vespers. You thank her, and she sniffs. Thank the cook by not bringing mud into her passage later. A fair bargain. She disappears into the rain, and you carry the meal to a ledge near the brazier where the older watchman, now up again despite having slept only a little, joins you with the air of a man who can smell pottage across political borders. The first spoonful is hot enough to wake your whole face. Barley, onion, broth, salt. The faint oily richness of fish, nothing subtle. Everything welcome. You tear bread, dip, chew, and feel the day become briefly manageable. Around you, others shelter as well the boy with the geese, now minus geese, and therefore much happier. A cooper waiting for the rain to ease before returning to the outer market. 2 castle servants carrying folded linens beneath waxed cloth, and a thin old woman with a basket of herbs who has been allowed to stand out of the wet because even the sternest gatekeeper hesitates to send a healer into a downpour. Her basket smells of sage, mint, rue, and something sharper beneath, perhaps wormwood. Tied to the handle is a little bunch of dried fennel, and a charm made from red thread twisted round a small piece of bone. For fever you ask, nodding at it. For envy, she says. This is said without irony. Medieval people, you are discovering, recognize envy as a force capable of ruining livestock, spoiling butter, souring ale, and giving children mysterious coughs. Some swear a red thread turns away the evil eye. Others say iron does it better, especially if it has once touched a church door. The old woman taps the bone charm. Had 3 calves sicken in one spring, she says. Since then, none. No one can quite agree whether such cures work because of the charm, the herb, the blessing whispered over it, or simple luck dressed in confident language. Yet when winter is long and children burn with fever, people rarely insist on choosing only one hope. You eat and listen. Rain makes everyone talk differently. It slows words, softens tempers, coaxes gossip out like steam from a wet cloak. The cooper complains that the steward has raised storage fees again for casks left overnight. The linen carriers mutter about a maid in the hall who has taken to borrowing pins and returning none, which in some households qualifies as organised crime. The gooseboy announces that one of the kitchen lads slipped in the yard chasing a bird and landed straight in a pile of dung, a story that improves with every retelling and is already nearing sainthood. The older watchman tears his bread with square fingers and says, "Rain'll bring in late travellers by evening." You nod. It usually does. Roads become slower, tempers shorter, and everyone who had hoped to reach some better lodging by dusk begins lowering their standards. A gatehouse, after all, is not comfort, but it is dry, and in the medieval imagination dry is only one rung below blessed. A bell sounds from deeper in the castle, muffled by weather. Sexed, or near enough. Time is softer in rain. The sound passes through stone and wool and steam, and for a moment everyone grows quiet. Even the old herb woman bows her head, whether in prayer or habit. Somewhere nearby a clerk will be scratching accounts with cold fingers. Somewhere in the hall a chaplain may be reciting over a noble's meal. Somewhere in the stable a horse is steaming gently while a groom rubs it down with straw. The castle continues its layered life around you, each chamber holding its own weather of labour and smell. The suspicious monk from the morning does not appear again, though you find your thoughts drifting back to him once or twice. The pilgrim with the letter, the worn badge, the quiet manner. Perhaps he's no more than he seemed. Perhaps the chaplain has him drying by the chapel fire now, speaking in that low way churchmen do when they want information to feel like mercy. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether monks bring peace wherever they go, or simply better hidden complications. You have met enough of both kinds to remain respectfully undecided. The rain beats harder for a few moments, drumming on wood overhead and hissing in the ditch outside. The dog lifts his head, decides weather is not actionable, and sets it back down on his paws. A servant girl slips in from the yard with her apron over her hair and laughs when she sees the cluster of you around the brazier. Looks like a council of damp crows. A distinguished council, says the older watchman. Then one of you ought to smell better. She steals a heel of bread from the basket and vanishes before anyone can protest, which is clever because bread stolen in a kitchen is theft. But bread stolen from men already eating is merely speed. The cooper chuckles into his cup. Small ale has been brought too, thin and sour and comforting in the way only familiar things can be. You drink it from a wooden cup with a chipped rim, and watch the rain make moving patterns beyond the arch. In the quieter stretch that follows, you take up a bit of work put off since morning. A length of cord at the side postern needs retying, and one peg in the shutter above has loosened in the wet. These are small tasks, almost laughably small compared with the grandeur of battlements and towers, and yet castles are held together by such things pegs, cords, patches, wedges, habits, and people too stubborn to let them fail. You climb the narrow stair within the wall to the little chamber above the gate passage and find it dim, smoky, and close, with a tiny slit window looking over the road. Wool blankets are folded on a bench. A half-burned candle gutters in a saucer, its beeswax scent faint but sweet. Someone has left a pair of damp gloves near the hearthstone to dry, and beside them lies a rosary of wooden beads worn shiny from handling. From the slit you can see the road stretching away under rain, empty for now except for one bent figure in the distance leading a donkey. It is impossible to tell whether the traveller will reach you in half an hour or two. Roads lengthen in bad weather, and people shrink within it. Even now, it is hard to tell whether the distant figure is a merchant, a messenger, or merely some unfortunate soul who believed the morning would clear. You retie the peg, test the shutter, and descend again. The pottage pot is nearly empty. The bread basket holds only crumbs and one hard corner no one wants badly enough. The herb woman has gone on into the inner yard. The cooper has returned to his casks. The rain remains. You settle once more beneath the arch, hands cupped briefly near the brazier, and feel the gatehouse return to its waiting mood. Midday has passed in damp talk, rough food, and small repairs. The castle stands around you in dripping stone and wet wool, ancient and inconvenienced. Beyond the bridge the road glistens, and somewhere out there, hidden in the weather, the next arrival is already making for your shelter. The bent figure you glimpse through the slit window does not arrive quickly. Rain stretches distance the way hunger stretches patience, and for a long while the road beyond the bridge remains little more than a silvered ribbon with one dark knot moving along it at a stubborn human pace. Midday leans toward afternoon. The brazier burns lower and is fed again. Water continues to slip from the eaves in patient threads. Carts pass only now and then. And those that do come through with the blunt urgency of people who no longer care how dignified they appear so long as they reach dryness. When at last the traveller reaches the drawbridge, he's not the same kind of pilgrim as the quiet one from morning. This man comes wrapped in a blackish robe darkened to near shine by rain, the hem clotted with mud, the hood thrown back enough to show a narrow face beaded with water and a tonsure that has grown out just enough to look less saintly than practical. A monk, or near enough, though monks vary as widely as weather and often with similar consequences. Slung across one shoulder hangs a bundle bound in waxed cloth and leather thongs. Under his opposite arm he carries a small wooden case, long and narrow, the kind that might hold books, documents, relics, bones, or, in especially unfortunate circumstances, cheese. He pauses under the arch and lets out a slow breath as though he has reached not merely shelter, but the end of an argument. Rain runs from the tip of his nose. His sandals, worn over wool wrappings, have acquired the shape and colour of the road itself. Peace on this house, he says. That is a good beginning, but not a sufficient credential. And on your errand, you reply, because even at a gate one may be civil before becoming suspicious. From where do you come? He names a priory to the north, one known more for its library than its holiness, though the monks would likely reverse those priorities in public. You have heard of it. Ink-stained brothers, a small orchard, strict fasting, a relic of a lesser saint that may or may not have spent several decades being attached to the wrong saint, entirely before anyone admitted the mistake. No one can quite agree whether such confusions are signs of divine mystery or simply the natural outcome of labelling bones in cold scriptoria by candlelight. The monk shifts the bundle on his shoulder and gives a little wince. He's tired, plainly. That can be genuine, rehearsed, or both at once. Travellers learn quickly that weariness opens doors, but so does truth, and the two are not enemies. What business brings you here, you ask? A letter for the steward, he says, and another for the chaplain. Also a package entrusted to my care. At that your gaze drops, quite reasonably, to the waxed bundle and the wooden case. His hands tighten slightly around the case when you look at it. A small thing, but you notice. Gatekeepers live by small things. Entrusted by whom? By our prior, for whom he hesitates just enough for unease to slip its foot in the door. For the castle chapel, he says, though the chaplain will know the matter better than I. That is not an answer. Not truly. It is a way of wrapping uncertainty in obedience. You invite him farther in from the rain, but not yet beyond your questions. The dog rises from beside the brazier and approaches with solemn interest, nose low, tail undecided. He sniffs the hem of the robe, then the monk's wet hand, then the bundle itself. If dogs could file official reports, medieval administration would be transformed. The older watchman, who's remained nearby with the unhurried alertness of a man who distrusts everyone equally, glances at you but says nothing. Good. Too many voices spoil a careful inquiry. You ask to see the letters first. The monk sets down the case and reaches inside his robe. From an inner pouch he produces 2 folded parchments sealed in dark wax. One bears the mark of his priory, a little cross within a ring. The other shows a clerical seal impressed somewhat crookedly, perhaps because the wax cooled too quickly in wet weather, or perhaps because haste has fingers of its own. The names are written plainly enough, one to the steward, one to the chaplain. The hands look different, not suspiciously different, merely written by different men, which itself is normal. Monasteries breed writing the way stables breed smell. You hold the sealed letters up near the torchlight. The monk watches, not nervously exactly, but attentively. Rainwater drips from the end of his sleeve to the stones, and the package he looks down at the bundle, a reliquary cloth and certain devotional objects requested for comparison. Requested by whom, you almost say, but the better question is simpler. Open it. That clearly pains him. Not because he refuses, but because he would rather not. Religious men often hate having their entrusted objects handled like market wares. You understand that, in theory. In practice, a bundle is a bundle until proven holier. With respect, he says, the prior sealed it. With equal respect, you answer, the gate stands before the chapel. For a moment only Rain speaks. Then he nods. Fair enough. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether monks resent secular authority more when it is rude or when it is correct. He kneels and begins untying the leather thongs with cold fingers. Up close you notice the rawness around his knuckles, the fine blue staining on one thumbnail from ink, and a faint smell of wet wool, beeswax, and something sharper beneath. Perhaps vinegar or the herbal wash some houses use against sickness. Around his neck hangs a small cross of dark wood worn smooth by thumb and time. On one finger he wears no ring, which tells you little. Though some swear men who handle relics should keep bare hands whenever possible, so pride does not get caught between metal and grace. Others say exactly the reverse. The waxed cloth comes away. Inside is another wrapping of linen, clean but old. Then a folded patterned cloth of faded red and gold, probably once brighter. Probably once part of a more splendid church furnishing before age demoted it to pious utility. There's also a small silver-gilt object wrapped separately in wool, and when the monk reveals it, the older watchman leans a fraction closer despite himself. It is a reliquary fitting, or perhaps part of a decorative mount in the shape of a tiny arched frame, worked with filigree now dark in the creases, set with two little pieces of coloured glass standing in for gemstones that likely disappeared into someone's pockets generations ago. It is beautiful in the modest, wounded way old sacred objects often are. Too fine for a roadside fraud, too incomplete for triumph. For comparison, you say. Our prior wrote to your chaplain. The monk replies, There is a relic held here, I am told, in a chapel cloth and frame not unlike this one. He hoped to compare workmanship. That is possible. Chaplains, priors, and scribes have an endless appetite for comparing relic wrappings, copied prayers, seals, saints' feast lists, and every other holy fragment that might confirm a date, a provenance, or an argument in a letter no one else ever wants to read. Medieval scholarship is sometimes just piety wearing spectacles it has not invented yet. Still, something sits oddly. Not the object itself, the story around it. You look to the wooden case, and that. The monk's hand rests on it almost offensively. Books. Open it. This time his reluctance is sharper. They are dry, he says. I would rather not open it. He obeys, though now a flush has risen in his face above the cold. The case lid lifts with a little sticking sound. Inside lie not books exactly, but 3 wrapped packets of parchment, 1 wax tablet, and a narrow leather pouch. Documents. Then, more dangerous in some ways than knives. Knives kill 1 man. Documents may unsettle 10. You lift 1 packet. It is addressed to the chaplain as well, in the same hand as one of the letters. Another bears no outer address at all, only a drawn cross and the word copied in Latin. The leather pouch, when you ask him to open it too, contains 2 small pilgrim badges, 1 lead token, and a tiny cloth sachet sewn shut. The older watchman finally speaks. What's in the little bag? The monk's jaw tightens. Herbs. For what? He hesitates. For a sick child at the village beyond the mill, a charitable errand tucked beside formal letters and a chapel comparison. Not impossible, merely crowded. You ask what herbs. He says feverfew, willow bark, and angelica root. That sounds plausible enough. Many monasteries keep physic gardens. Monks know simples, syrups, poultices, and all the old uneasy bargains between prayer and plant. Leeches for bad blood, honey for wounds, sage for the throat, charms for what herbs cannot touch. Some swear angelica wards off pestilence if worn around the neck. Others burn it in rooms where the sick lie, the smoke bitter and hopeful. Why not say so first? He looks tired now in a way that seems less performed than before. Because at every gate I am questioned 3 times more for carrying a remedy than for carrying a prayer. That may be because remedies can be tested, and prayers cannot. The older watchman makes a soft sound that might be a laugh smothered before birth. You study the monk a little longer. His story is untidy, but real journeys often are. A formal errand, a side favour for a child, devotional objects packed in haste against rain. Still, there is one more loose thread. You said the chapel package was entrusted to your care. By the prior, yes, and the herb sachet by the infirmarian, and the badges he pauses for a nephew. Ah, there it is, the fully human note at the centre of all solemn errands. A monk with letters for clergy, an old chapel fitting in cloth, herbs for a feverish child, and cheap pilgrimage trinkets meant for some relation waiting at home. no grand conspiracy, just the medieval habit of folding 6 duties into one journey and hoping no gatekeeper minds the crease. Even so, you do mind the crease a little. It is your business to mind it. You send a boy to fetch the chaplain and another to inform the steward that a monk stands with sealed letters and chapel goods. Until one of them comes, the traveller may wait inside the passage where it is dry but not private. The monk bows his head, neither grateful nor insulted, merely accepting. He wraps the reliquary fitting again with careful fingers, lays the packets back in the case, and settles on the bench near the wall. Steam rises faintly from his robe as it begins to dry. The dog, having completed his investigation, circles twice and lies near the monk's feet as if deciding that sanctity, paperwork, and damp sandals all smell equally harmless. Rain still whispers outside, in the yard, somewhere beyond view. A child laughs, a cart jolts over stone, and a bell marks an hour no one feels inclined to count to exactly. You stand by the gate and watch the monk sit with his bundle and case, a small island of wet black cloth and patient uncertainty. Even now, it is hard to tell whether what unsettled you was the man himself, the object he carried, or simply that holy business, once wrapped in rain and secrecy, begins to resemble every other kind of trouble. By the time the monk has been collected by the chaplain, and the steward's runner has splashed away through the yard, with all the solemn haste of a man carrying other people's complications, the rain has eased from steady curtain to patient drizzle. The world outside the gate is still wet enough to shine, but edges have returned to things. The road beyond the bridge reappears in strips of brown and grey. Bare branches gleam. Water gathers at the tips of ironwork and falls in slower, heavier drops. The castle exhales. So do you. Afternoons at a gate have a different temper from mornings. Morning brings purpose, lists, deliveries, market dues, the formal arrival of business. Afternoon brings loitering, errands half remembered, children who have escaped someone's supervision, dogs who belong nowhere and everywhere, and the long, slow spread of rumour through all available mouths. A castle gate is not only a barrier, it is a funnel for news, nonsense, bargaining, complaint, superstition, and the kind of small human theatre that never makes it into chronicles because it is too common, which is precisely why it matters. You stand just within the arch, one shoulder against stone still cool with damp, and watch a woman from the lower village hurry across the bridge with a basket covered in cloth. She has no market goods, only a message for a cousin in service, and a face that suggests the message is either urgent or delicious. Often the difference is negligible. You let her through after a few questions. 10 minutes later a boy appears claiming to be sent after her with forgotten gloves. The gloves, when he finally produces them from under his jerkin, are so obviously his own that even the dog seems embarrassed for him. No, you say, but she needs them, in weather like this. So do you. He shifts from foot to foot, calculating whether invention is worth extending. Behind him, 2 smaller children have paused at the start of the bridge to stare into the gate passage with the fascinated caution usually reserved for shrines and dangerous geese. One has a runny nose, the other clutches a stick as if it were a ceremonial staff. You've come to look at the chains, you say. The smaller one nods at once. Or the dog, says the larger. The dog, hearing himself discussed, opens one eye, then closes it again in a performance of indifference so practised it ought to earn wages. Children and gates are old companions. Gates promise mystery. Beyond them lie kitchens, horses, soldiers, maybe a noble, almost certainly interesting mud. and the possibility of seeing something adults have not meant for you to see. Village children hover around thresholds the way sparrows hover around grain. They appear, vanish, reappear, and ask questions with the shameless courage of people too young to understand which answers are above their station. "Does the bridge ever break?" asks the one with the stick. Only when boys ask too many questions. He considers this gravely, as if testing whether the bridge might hear him and take offence. Medieval childhood is full of useful warnings like this, most of them untrue in detail but excellent in effect. The older child points toward the brazier. "Can we warm there briefly?" That is how it begins. One moment you're keeping a gate, the next you are presiding over a temporary assembly of damp children, a half-asleep dog, and a boy with suspicious gloves who has now plainly abandoned his original mission in favour of warmth. They crowd near the brazier and hold out hands red from the cold. Their clothes smell of rain, churned earth, and smoke from low village hearths. One has straw caught in a cuff. Another wears a tiny lead badge pinned crookedly to her kirtle. A saint so rubbed by handling that his face has become nearly abstract. "Is that for luck, you ask?" "For my cough," she says. "Does it help?" She shrugs. Gran says it scares the bad air. There it is again, that medieval dance between sickness and story, bad air, bad humours, evil eye, cold phlegm, cursed wells, marsh vapours, God's correction, unlucky stars. Some swear a saint's badge worn over the chest keeps fever from settling there. Others tie wolf tooth, rowan berries, or bits of blessed palm into a child's shirt seam. Even now, it is hard to tell whether these remedies ease the body, the mind, or simply the panic of grown people who cannot bear to do nothing. Before you can ask more, the suspicious boy with the gloves points down the road and says, "Old Mira says a dead man walked past the shrine last night. Of course she did. A drizzle, a shrine, and an old woman are the three ingredients from which half the countryside's rumours are brewed. A dead man," says the child with the stick, delighted, with no face, the boy adds, improving the tale while it is still warm. The smaller child makes a thrilled noise. The dog lifts his head, unimpressed by undeath. You lean on the gatepost. Old Mira also says her onions grow better when insulted. "That part's true," says one of the girls seriously. You cannot argue with agricultural mysteries. Some customs are so old no one remembers whether they began as joke, prayer, or accident. There are villages where people still beat orchard trees with switches in winter to wake them, or pour ale at the roots on 12th night, or mutter blessings into the first churn of spring butter so witches do not steal the cream. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether these habits are folly or wisdom in rough clothing, but they persist, and that persistence itself has weight. A stray dog appears then from under the bridge, smaller than the gate dog and much wetter, with the gaunt, hopeful look of a creature who has made a career of joining human situations moments before food becomes visible. The gate dog rises at once, not angrily, but with the full authority of local office. The children go silent. The stranger dog freezes. What follows is not quite a fight and not quite diplomacy. It is an exchange of sniffs, stiff legs, one low growl, and the solemn establishment of jurisdictions. At last the smaller dog is allowed 3 cautious steps toward the brazier. No more. "See," says the glove boy. "Even dogs pay toll. A bone apiece, you say." The children laugh, and for a moment the whole damp passage softens. Outside, a pair of women pass on the road and glance in. Somewhere above on the wall walker guard coughs. From the yard comes the ring of metal on metal as the smith's apprentice sets something down too hard. Life gathers itself in these little sounds. Then, as always, rumour resumes. The stick-bearing child asks whether the monk who came earlier was carrying a finger bone. Another claims her brother saw silver under the wrapping. The girl with the saint badge says her aunt swears the castle chapel keeps a relic that sweats before storms. The glove boy insists there is a tunnel under the gate that leads straight to the Lord's wine cellar, which is such a lovely idea that you almost let it stand. No tunnel, you say. He looks disappointed. There should be. There are already enough ways for trouble to enter. This is a truth so simple even children understand it. Thresholds attract stories because thresholds are where certainty thins. A road becomes a yard. Outsiders become guests, traders, servants, suspects. News crosses over and changes shape in the telling. A broken cartwheel becomes a robbery. A monk with a bundle becomes a secret relic. A lantern seen in mist becomes a ghost. By the time such things reach the kitchens, they have often achieved sainthood or murder. A woman from the village arrives then, panting, shawl over her hair, and catches sight of the cluster around your brazier. "There you are," she says to the smallest child. "I turn my back to mend one sleeve and you've migrated to the castle." The child looks unrepentant. The woman thanks you, scolds the group with practiced efficiency, and begins herding them away. The boys linger just long enough to try one final question. Will the gates shut before dark? They always do. What if someone important is late? Then they are important and late. This seems to satisfy them. They trudge back through the damp, the smaller stray dog trotting after in hopes of adoption or crumbs. The gate dog watches them go, then returns to his place beside the brazier with the air of a man who has defended the realm through administrative excellence. Quiet returns, though never completely. A pair of village women pass with gossip tucked between them like contraband. A servant from the hall crosses the yard carrying linen and pauses just long enough to ask whether the steward looked cross after reading the monk's letter. He always looks cross, you answer, which is both helpful and accurate. A cart creaks by outside, one wheel still complaining in the same rhythm you heard this morning, and you wonder whether the broken cartwheel from last week was ever properly fixed, or merely prayed over and persuaded onward. The drizzle lightens again. Water still drops from stone and timber, but the worst of the day's wet has passed. In the softer air after rain you smell everything more clearly damp hay from the stable yard, wood smoke from the village, old rushes in the passage, onion skins crushed underfoot, wet dog, warm ash, and somewhere faintly the lingering sweetness of beeswax from the candle above stairs. Such scents become the true furniture of your life here, more constant than tapestries or banners. You rest one hand on the inner gate leaf and look out over the road. No army, no herald, no wonder, only puddles, villagers, dogs, children, and 100 little stories crossing in and out beneath your arch. It is ordinary, and because it is ordinary, it is what holds. By late afternoon the rumours will have ripened further. The children will swear they nearly saw a holy bone. The village women will have added a secret, and somewhere old Mirror will still be insisting a faceless dead man walked past the shrine, and under the gate, where all these tales pause for breath, you keep listening. By the time the afternoon begins to thin into evening, the rain has nearly spent itself. What remains hangs in the air as a soft dampness rather than a fall, and the world beyond the bridge shines as though every board, stone, and bare branch has been rubbed with oil. The sky has not cleared exactly, but it has lifted. A pale wash of light lies behind the western clouds, enough to silver the moat and make the wet road gleam, all the way down toward the village huts and the distant line of trees. It is the hour when people who hope to arrive earlier begin to hurry, and people already sheltered begin to relax too soon. At a gate, that is when your attention sharpens again. The older watchman has gone to take food at last, leaving you with the dog, the toll chest, the brazier grown lower now that the worst cold has passed, and the long familiar business of weighing faces in the failing light. Dusk changes everyone. Honest men look secretive, tired women look guilty, carts become hulking shapes with uncertain contents, and every hood seems drawn a little too low. Torchlight helps, but it also flatters worry. It throws long shadows, brightens eyes strangely, and makes wet stone look theatrical enough to encourage nonsense. The first of the late arrivals is a tanner's man with a pony cart and 3 folded hides under waxed cloth. You smell him before you see him properly, which is only kind. Tanning has a way of announcing itself like bad news. He pays his entry without argument, muttering that the road near the mill is half swamp now and that one wheel nearly came off in the ruts. You glance at the cart and believe him. Mud cakes the spokes. One iron tire is loosened enough to rattle faintly. You'll want the wheelwright before full dark. You say, I'd want a miracle first. Wheelwrights are cheaper. He grunts and goes through, his pony stepping with the exhausted dignity of a beast that knows men always load one hide too many. The smell lingers after him like an opinion. Then come 2 women wrapped in cloaks, each carrying a basket and each speaking at once before you have even asked their business. That, in itself, is often promising. Guilty people rehearse silence. Honest people arrive already defending themselves against imagined delay. Eggs for the kitchens, and a message for my brother, and a cap I promised to mend for the laundress. And she said if I did not bring it back tonight, she'd tell everyone I kept the better thread for myself. You hold up a hand, one at a time, unless the baskets are paying separately. That wins you a brief laugh, which helps. You check the baskets. One contains eggs cushioned in straw and wool scraps, the other folded linen, a small loaf wrapped in cloth, and indeed a half-mended cap with neat stitches along the brim. The women pass under the arch still muttering about thread, laundresses, and the moral collapse that follows from borrowing pins without witnesses. The road falls quiet for perhaps 10 breaths. Then, far off, you hear it, the uneven grind and thump of a heavier cart being urged faster than the road likes. Wheels over wet ruts, harness leather straining, a horse snorting, someone shouting, not in alarm exactly, but in the voice of a man trying to arrive before something shuts. The dog lifts his head. You step nearer the open gate and peer into the dim. A covered wagon emerges from the road's shallow bend, lantern swinging at one side, its light dull and yellow against the wet. The horse pulling it is broad and tired, neck dark with damp. Beside the wagon walks a man with a stick, one boot noticeably muddier than the other because of some recent miscalculation. On the bench sits another man wrapped in a cloak and cap, urging the horse onward with the hopeless confidence of someone who has never had to be the horse. Behind them, half running to keep up, comes a woman with a bundle against her chest. Late arrivals always carry tension with them, but families more than most. A lone traveller can be turned aside with a shrug, a curse, and a search for another roof. A wagon with a child inside, a woman on foot, and darkness gathering at its wheels complicates a threshold in all the old human ways. They reach the bridge just as you raise your voice. Hold there. The man on the bench pulls the horse up with visible relief. The woman bends double for a moment, then straightens and tucks the bundle tighter under her cloak. It is a child, asleep or pretending. The man with the stick wipes his face with his sleeve and tries to smile in a manner that suggests he hopes you are a sentimental fool with limited procedural loyalty. "We seek lodging in the lower village," he says, "only to pass through before dark." That would have sounded better if they'd arrived before dark. You look at the wagon, canvas cover, patched but sound. One chest at the rear, a bundle of tools or farm gear tied under the side rail. 2 hens in a wicker crate, quiet for once, which is suspicious behaviour in hens. The horse favours one front leg slightly. The woman's cloak is of decent wool but mended at the hem. Not beggars, then not prosperous either. The child's blanket is clean, which you always notice. From where you ask. They name a village to the east, one you know by reputation more than by road. The man on the bench says his sister married into the lower village here, and they aim to reach her house before full night. The woman adds, with the tight calm of someone who is past embarrassment, that the child grew feverish at noon, and they would rather not stop in open weather. The man with the stick says the wheel near failed in the last mile, and he is not eager to test it again by moonlight. It is a sensible story. That does not make it true, but it helps. You ask the sister's husband's name. The benchman gives one quickly. You ask what trade he keeps. A half-second pause. "Carpenter," he says. The woman corrects him at once. "Cooper. Interesting. A liar's mistake, or a tired brother's ignorance." Families are often less informed about each other's trades than one might hope. The child gives a small cough from within the bundle, and the woman lowers her head to murmur something soft. Fever does travel with its own smell sometimes, warm and sour beneath damp wool. The hens rustle in their crate. The horse stamps and blows steam. No one can quite agree whether evening is the safest time to admit travellers or the worst. Some swear the devil favours thresholds at dusk because light itself is undecided. Others say that refusing shelter too near night draws worse luck than any stranger could carry in. Castles are practical places, mostly, but they are built by people, and people drag legends in with the firewood. You ask them to come under the arch one by one. The man with the stick obeys first. Up close he looks less suspicious than merely tired and slightly annoyed at his own body. His beard is patchy with rain. His hands bear the thickened knuckles of labour. There is a nick on his thumb, half healed, and one sleeve smells faintly of pitch. Cart repair, perhaps. The benchman is younger, rounder in the face, with cleverer eyes, and a way of glancing inward toward the yard too quickly. That could mean guilt. It could also mean he is already picturing supper. You check the rear chest. Inside are spare clothes, a bag of oats, a folded wool blanket, a wooden spoon, 3 onions, and one carefully wrapped parcel containing something smoked and precious enough to travel well. Probably ham or fish. Beneath the bench are tools, hammer, draw knife, pegs, a coil of rope. Honest objects. Though honest objects have hidden many dishonest plans over the centuries, the hens are simply hens, offended by inspection. The dog sniffs the wheel, then the horse, then the child's blanket, and makes no proclamation either way. The woman steps closer when you ask about the child. "Just warm," she says. "Warm and sleepy." You touch the child's forehead only with the back of your fingers, lightly, because fever is not a thing one courts, and because mothers watch such gestures with hawk eyes. The skin is indeed warm, not blazing, but enough. The child blinks once, sees torchlight and your face, decides none of this is worth waking for, and turns inward again. Admirable judgment. The benchman clears his throat. "We can pay a village fee, or not to me, you cannot." He nods quickly. Wrong gate for that trick, then. You consider the lowering sky, the muddy wheel, the coughing child, and the simple fact that dusk is nearly here. Behind you the inner yard glows warmer now, windows beginning to show light. The kitchens will be busy. The outer village, if they truly head there, lies only a little farther. But roads grow treacherous in the last murk of day, especially after rain. A turned axle, a lame horse, a feverish child. And suddenly you're not keeping a gate but explaining a frozen family to a priest in the morning. Pass through, you say at last, and go straight down to the lower village. Ask for the reeve if the cooper is not where you expect. Do not wander the yard. Do not stop by the hall. And if you are lying, may the dog remember your smell. The dog, hearing his promotion to divine witness, stands and wags once with bureaucratic dignity. Relief loosens the woman's shoulders so visibly it almost startles you. The man with the stick bows his head in thanks. The benchman smiles too broadly, which you dislike on principle, but perhaps that is only the face he has when spared trouble. They clatter through, wheel protesting, hens muttering, child coughing softly once more beneath the cloak. You watch until they pass down into the lower way beyond the inner yard, and out toward the clustered houses below. After them come two more stragglers, a messenger on foot with a badge from a neighbouring manor and a sack sealed in wax, and an elderly peddler carrying ribbons, needles, and saints' tokens in a tray covered with cloth. Both are simpler to judge, simpler to pass or delay, yet the family lingers in your mind, as late arrivals often do. The light fades further, torches are lit more fully under the arch, wet stone catches their glow in amber smears. Beyond the bridge, the road loses detail and becomes only direction. Evening has come proper now, and every face approaching from the dusk asks the same quiet question. Will the gate still be open when I reach it for a little while longer? Yes. The last of the late arrivals have passed beneath the arch, and evening settles over the castle with the slow, layered certainty of a wool blanket being drawn up against the cold. Beyond the gate, the road has become a dark band with only a little sheen left in it from the day's rain. The trees are blacker shapes against a sky that still holds a dim, bruised light in the west. Inside the walls, however, the castle begins its nightly rearrangement. Windows warm one by one. Smoke thickens from the kitchen vents. Voices grow fewer in the open yard and gather instead behind doors, around hearths, under rafters darkened by years of soot and winter breath. You pull one gate leaf inward a little more, narrowing the opening now that the hour grows late, and hand the toll chest off to the steward's clerk, who arrives with damp shoes, ink on his cuff, and the expression of a man personally injured by arithmetic. How much clipped coin he asks before greeting you. Less than your nightmares hoped. He gives you a narrow look, opens the chest, and begins counting by torchlight with lips moving faintly. The man could probably inventory a monastery's sins if someone arranged them by denomination. He disappears toward the inner ward carrying the box like a holy burden, and the gate passage at once feels lighter, as though numbers themselves have weight. The older watchman returns then, beard a little less wild after food, and together you begin the soft unwinding of duty that comes before full closure. Not yet the bolting of night, not yet the dragging of the bar into place, but the quieter part first easing out of public labour and into that inward mood all castles take on after dusk. A threshold changes character with the hour. By day it is a mouth, by evening it becomes a set of teeth. You climb the narrow stair to the chamber above the passage, following the smell of heat and broth. The room is low-ceilinged and close, with rough plastered walls and one small hearth, where a modest fire works diligently against the damp. A half-burned beeswax candle burns on the table, sweetening the smoky air just enough to remind you that somewhere in the castle there are finer rooms, better light, and people who do not have to dry their gloves beside their supper. Wool blankets are stacked at one end of the bench. 2 spears lean near the door. A coil of rope hangs from a peg beside a fur-lined cloak that has seen too many winters and is now more patched than original ambition. On the table waits your evening meal, a wooden bowl of pottage thicker than at midday, this time made with peas and barley, a heel of coarse bread, a little dish of salt, and a strip of smoked fish beside a nub of white cheese. There is ale too, dark and flat and welcome, humble fare certainly, but the sort that makes a tired body forgive much. Medieval luxury is often less about delicacy than about not being cold while chewing. You sit with the older watchman and a younger guard who's come off the wall walk for his turn at food. He cannot be many years older than the glove-thieving boy from the village will be in time, though responsibility has already drawn his face into a more careful shape. His hands are reddened from wind. One knee bounces once or twice before he remembers himself and stills it. For a time you all eat in silence, the best sort of companionship after a damp day. The pottage is thick enough to hold a spoon upright if the spoon is ambitious. Steam rises into your face carrying onion, pea, salt, and the faint comfort of marrow if the cook has been generous, or if a bone simply surrendered on its own. The smoked fish is strong, oily, and excellent. You tear bread and dip it. Fire cracks softly. From below comes the muffled sound of footsteps in the passage and the low murmur of a servant finishing some last errand before the gates are fully closed. At length the older watchman drinks and wipes his mouth with the back of his hand. "So," he says, "what did the monk want?" This is the sort of question that passes easily in gate chambers and almost nowhere else. Not because it is your secret to keep entirely, but because you sit above the passage where stories pause and everyone knows you hear more than most. Letters, you say, a chapel fitting, herbs for a child, badges for a nephew, unless he invented the nephew after I asked too many things. The younger guard snorts. Monks always have nephews once they're searched. Or relics, says the older man, or cheeses, says the younger. Cheeses are the most trustworthy. This receives the solemn nod it deserves. Monks, relics, and cheese have all crossed thresholds since time began, but only one of them improves predictably with age. The older watchman tears the smoked fish with blunt fingers. I heard from the chaplain's runner that the little silver thing he carried matches work from a house far west of here. Some old chapel frame, maybe, or maybe not. Those clergy like comparing patterns until the candles go out. That is one way to make eternity pass, you say. The younger guard leans closer to the fire. My aunt swears the castle chapel's relic is false anyway. Which aunt? The one who says saints prefer silver to pewter and therefore never work miracles for poor people? Ah, says the older watchman, a theologian. You drink your ale to hide the smile. No one can quite agree whether relics are holy because of what they are, because of what people believe them to be, or because enough prayers have clung to them over time to make them powerful by habit alone. Some swear a saint's finger bone can warm in its case before a storm. Some swear that if a relic is false, it still may work if heaven is in a forgiving mood. Even now, it is hard to tell where doctrine ends and wishfulness begins, especially once the fire is low and supper has made everyone braver. The younger guard, encouraged by warmth, begins another topic with the urgency of someone who has been saving it. Old Taven in the stables says that if you hang wolf's tooth over a horse stall, no hag can ride the beast by night. The older watchman does not even look up. Old Tavin also says he once saw a bishop drink 6 cups of cider and sing like a bride. That part can happen. Exactly. You chew slowly and listen as talk drifts, as it always does in cramped rooms where men sit half-tired and half-comfortable. They speak of a woman in the outer village who still buries a crust of bread near her threshold on the first frost to keep hunger from entering the house. They speak of a carpenter who rubs his tools with St. John's wort because his father did, and his father's father before that, though none can say what misfortune the herb is meant to prevent. They speak of a manor court 2 valleys over where, so rumour has it, a pig was once brought to answer for theft because it kept eating candle ends from the church porch. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether the pig was fined, blessed, or simply chased away. But each version improves after ale. The younger guard laughs into his cup, then rubs at one eye with the heel of his hand. He's tired enough that the firelight makes him look younger. The older watchman glances toward the door and says, "Quieter now. Dusk's the hard part." You know what he means. Not the labour of shutting the gate, though there is that. Not even the judging of stragglers. He means the hinge in the day itself, when outside and inside pull apart, when the road is abandoned to weather and chance and the castle folds its safety around those already admitted. There is something solemn in that movement. A gatekeeper spends all day deciding who comes in. Evening is when he also decides, in a way, who remains out. Below, the sound of someone drawing a stool along stone scrapes up through the floorboards. The candle gutters and rights itself. A little draught slides under the door, carrying the smell of wet wood and night air. You finish the pottage and sit back, bowl empty in your hands. The room holds the ordinary richness of small medieval comfort, fire warmth at your shins, wool drying on pegs, beeswax and smoke, rough food in the belly, familiar voices, the old stone all around like a patient beast at rest. It is not ease exactly. Your boots are still damp, your shoulders still ache. One splinter from the gate beam has worked deeper into your palm and will have to be coaxed out later by candlelight. But rest does not need perfection to be real. The older watchman reaches into a little leather pouch at his belt and draws out a pinch of dried herbs, which he throws onto the hearth. At once, a bitter-sweet scent rises, sharper than the room's usual smoke. Rue, you ask. Rosemary and a bit of juniper, for the smell, for the room. He shrugs, and because my mother swore it keeps bad dreams from settling in rafters. The younger guard nods as though this is obvious. In castles and villages alike, people do many things against the dark that they would never bother explaining by daylight. Herbs in the hearth, blessings on lintels, iron knives tucked beneath bedding, a charm sewn into a sleeve, a prayer said twice if the wind changes midway. You may laugh a little at such habits, but you notice how often they are practiced by the same people who claim not to believe them. The fire sinks lower. Outside the chamber window the last western grey thins further, and the wet yard below begins to lose detail. Somewhere in the hall a burst of distant laughter rises and fades. Somewhere else a bell rings softly for evening prayer. The castle is gathering itself inward now, each room lit or dark according to rank, need, and habit. Soon you will go down again to the passage. Soon the bar will be lifted. Soon the door that has admitted the whole breathing world all day will become oak, iron, and refusal. For one more little while, though, you sit above the gate with your bowl, your ale, your companions, and the slow warmth of supper spreading through you like mercy. When you go back down into the gate passage, evening has deepened into that blue-black hour when torchlight begins to matter more than the sky. The last pale stain in the west has nearly gone. Wet stones under the arch catch the flames in broken amber streaks, and the damp boards of the drawbridge shine faintly beyond, leading out into a darkness that seems much farther away now than it did at midday. The castle has changed its posture. By day it opened one careful eye upon the road. By night it folds its limbs inward and listens. You pause a moment beneath the arch and breathe in the scents that belong only to this hour spent rain drying from old oak, smoke from the torches, the warm sourness of the brazier, damp leather, wet dog, and from somewhere behind you the last drifting promise of supper from the kitchens. Above, the chamber where you have just eaten glows at the shutter cracks. Ahead, beyond the bridge, the road is mostly silence. This is the hour of closing, not dramatic in the way songs prefer, but solemn in a manner older and truer. A castle gate does not simply shut. It is secured by sequence, habit, weight, prayer, and the accumulated mistrust of generations. You cannot hurry it too much, though in rain or fear people try. You must look one final time down the road. You must listen. You must make certain no messenger comes pounding through the dark with a badge from some neighbouring manor. No servant returns late from the village with a basket and excuses. No cartwheel complains near enough to be admitted before the doors turn from welcome to denial. The older watchman joins you with a torch in one hand and the great ring of keys at his belt. The younger guard comes too, fastening his cloak and rubbing his palms together as though preparing not merely for labour, but for a small ritual. In a sense he is. Much of medieval life is practical work arranged in the shape of ritual simply because repetition makes it easier to trust. You begin, as you always do, with the outer look. The younger guard crosses the drawbridge just far enough to scan the road from the far lip. Torch raised. Its light throws a trembling gold circle over wet planks and ditch water below. Beyond that, darkness and the faint ghost of the road. He stands still, listening. Somewhere far off an owl calls once, then again. The sound comes from the stand of trees near the roadside shrine, a long soft note like cloth torn slowly in two. Some swear 3 owl calls before a gate closes mean that someone still living will dream of the dead that night. Others say it means only mice are foolish enough to travel in wet weather. The owl calls a 3rd time. The younger guard looks back at you as if asking whether the bird has filed an official omen. Finish looking, you say. He does. Then returns across the bridge. No cart, no rider, no delayed noble with a temper and a wet cloak. Good. That simplifies the world. Next comes the signal. The older watchman takes up the horn kept on a peg just inside the passage, a short curved thing bound in brass at the lip, and blows one low call out into the dark. It is not loud enough for distant fields, only enough for the road near the gate, the lower village, the castle yard, a warning wrapped in sound. If you're coming, come now. If you're late, begin regretting it immediately. You wait after the horn. Always wait. That is another rule. So many disasters begin with not waiting the extra half minute. Wind moves in the trees, water drips from the eaves, far off. A dog barks in the village below, and another answers. No feet slap the bridge. No voice calls. The world outside has chosen its own shelter. Right, says the older watchman. You set the first task in motion. The younger guard takes the torch and moves to the winch release of the drawbridge. Chains do not like damp weather any more than hinges do, and tonight they complain richly. He lifts the catch. The older watchman and you take position at the bars, hands closing around wood polished smooth by years of labour. Together you work the mechanism. The bridge begins to rise with a groaning reluctance that seems almost moral. Link after link drawing tight. Planks tilting upward, water running off in silver threads from the boards as they leave the earth. The chain noise fills the passage and rolls outward into the dark like iron thunder. Slowly, the bridge climbs. Halfway up. It seems for a moment absurd that so much of safety depends on wet timber and muscle, but that is the medieval way of many things. Grandeur from a distance, awkward effort up close. When the bridge reaches its night position and settles against the outer face of the gate with a final heavy shudder, the castle has already become harder to reach. The ditch below is black now, the outer road broken. A simple change, yet it alters everything. Inside, you feel it at once, the subtle closing of the world. Then come the doors. Each great leaf of oak stands open just enough still to let the last air pass through. You grasp the inner handle, the older watchman the other, and pull. The leaves move slowly at first, their hinges giving a deep wooden complaint. Wet oak drags, iron strains, and the edges near one another with patient inevitability. This is not the quick slam of tavern drama. This is age, thickness, and certainty. The gap narrows from a man's width to a child's width to a slit of darkness, then closes with a deep joining thud that you feel more in your ribs than in your ears. For a heartbeat, all is still. Then the securing begins. The lower bolts first, because they must be seated true before anything above settles wrong. You crouch and guide the iron tongue into its socket in the stone floor. It resists the damp again, of course, then takes with a harsh scrape. The younger guard mutters satisfaction. The upper catch is next, then the wicket latch, checked twice, then the pegs on the inner brace. Every piece of hardware has its own sound: knock, clack, scrape, thud. A castle by night is built from such noises as much as from stone. At last comes the great bar. Together you lift it from its brackets. It is heavier in damp weather, or so everyone claims, though no one has ever had the leisure to prove it. Your palms find the familiar places worn smooth by other hands. The beam smells of old resin, smoke, and centuries of touch. Shoulder, arm, step, breathe. You raise it, guide one end into its socket, then the other, lowering it into place across the gate leaves with the careful grunt of men doing a job that punishes clumsiness. When it lands, the sound is thick and final. There, oak, iron, and refusal. The younger guard exhales through his nose as though he's been holding breath since sunset. The older watchman makes the sign of the cross over the closed doors. Quick and habitual, you do the same, though without much thought, because many hands have done it here, and because there is no harm in asking blessing over anything that keeps the dark outside. Some swear a gate should always be crossed with prayer when closed, lest whatever lingers on the road decide to linger at the threshold too. Others tuck a bit of rowan into the bar socket, or mark the lintel with blessed chalk at Candlemas for the same reason. Even now, it is hard to tell where defensive architecture ends and defensive superstition begins. In practice, most wise people employ both. A little peep sounds from the side. The dog has risen and now stands facing the closed doors, ears half forward, as though listening through oak. You wait, listening too. There is nothing at first, then the faintest scrape from outside. Not a hand, not a boot, too low and irregular. A branch dragged by wind, perhaps, or one of the smaller creatures of ditch and dark seeking dry edges. The dog huffs once and relaxes. Administration continues. You move through the last checks, torches secured, wicket locked, side postern barred, chain release wedged, the horn returned to its peg, the brazier banked so its coals will last but not spit sparks into the rushes, the tally of closures muttered almost under breath like a charm bridge, doors, bolts, bar, postern, latch, torch, brazier, habits again. Habits keep men from lying awake later wondering whether they forgot the small thing that invites the large consequence. From deeper in the castle comes the softened life of evening distant laughter from the hall. A pan set down in the kitchen, one late pail in the yard, a horse stamping in the stable. All ordinary, all precious. Inside the gate is warmth, rank, prayer, labour, blankets, quarrels, bread and sleep. Outside is weather, road, ditch water, thieves if you are unlucky, spirits if you're suggestible, and mud regardless. The younger guard leans one shoulder against the barred gate and says quietly, "Feels different once it's shut." "Yes," says the older watchman, "that is all and enough, because it does feel different. The threshold has become a wall again. The road has been denied. The day's 1,000 little judgments are over, replaced now by a single, solid decision, not until morning." You stand a while longer in the torchlit passage with one hand resting on the great beam, feeling the faint cold seep through the wood. On the other side of it lies the night, uninvited but near. On this side lies the castle, folded inward around its sleeping, eating, praying, aching life. And with the gates bolted, barred, and blessed, you feel the old stone settle around you, as though the whole place has drawn one long breath and chosen to keep it until dawn. With the gate shut and the great bar settled into its sockets, the castle's noise changes shape. It does not become silent. Castles are never silent unless something has gone very badly wrong or very expensively right. But the sounds that remain now are inward sounds, folded and muffled by walls, a door closing somewhere above, a burst of laughter from the hall, a lad running too quickly across the yard and being corrected by someone older and sharper, the distant shifting of horses in the stable, the occasional clink of chain or bucket, all softened by stone and night. The road beyond the gate has been dismissed. Your world narrows to wall, torch, stair, parapet, and the black country lying just outside reach. You pull your cloak tighter and take up the lantern for the wall walk. Its horn panes are smoky, its light warmer and steadier than the torches below, and when you lift it the flame throws a circle that moves with you like a careful thought. The younger guard remains in the passage to tend the brazier and keep the first stretch of watch there. The older watchman climbs with you as far as the stairhead, then peels off toward the tower corner where he prefers to stand a while and listen before settling his bones on the bench. Everyone has his habits at night, and night watch is made almost entirely of habits. The stair within the wall is narrow, spiral, and damp from the day's weather. Your hand glides along cold stone worn smooth by centuries of other hands. The lantern light catches little beads of moisture in the joints, making them gleam like fish scales for an instant before dark swallows them again. At the top you emerge onto the curtain wall, where the air strikes colder at once, cleaner too, with the smell of wet lime mortar, river damp, and distant wood smoke drifting from the lower village. The wind is not fierce, only steady enough to nose its way into your sleeves and make sure you never forget the season. From up here the castle lies below in dim arrangements of roof and courtyard, window glow and shadow. The hall shows amber through its shutters. The chapel has one narrow band of light where the lamp near the altar still burns. The stable yard is darker, but every now and then a groom's lantern moves there in a brief gold swing and disappears again. Beyond the inner buildings, the countryside spreads away in black fields and softer black trees, all stitched together by the faint paling of the road and the silver suggestion of water in the ditch and river bends. You begin your slow walk along the parapet, boots sounding dull against the damp stone. The crenellations rise and fall beside you, their tops wet, their shadows deep. Here and there rainwater still clings in shallow hollows, reflecting the lantern briefly before going dark again. The bowman's loopholes are black slits. At one corner a little drift of straw has gathered where someone tucked it against the wind days ago and forgot it. At another, an old bucket sits overturned, filling gradually with sky. Night watch is not heroic in the way young men imagine. It is long, cold, repetitive, and full of listening to things that do not happen. Yet that very repetition shapes the mind into something patient. You walk, stop, look, listen, walk again. Look down toward the base of the wall where wet weeds lean in the ditch. Look outward toward the road. Listen for hoofbeats, for wheels, for voices where there should be none. Listen too for the ordinary noises that prove the world remains ordinary. An owl, a fox bark, water moving, wind in winter-thin branches. Men stay calmer with familiar noises, even when they claim not to notice them. The first thing you hear clearly is the river, or at least the nearer branch of it that curves below the slope beyond the lower meadow. In daylight it is unremarkable enough, brown and practical. At night it becomes a low, constant breathing in the dark, broken now and then by the knock of water against something wooden, perhaps a little landing stage or an old snag caught in the current. Somewhere farther off monastery bells ring, faint and delayed by the damp air, marking an hour you cannot be bothered to count precisely. Bells always sound lonelier by night, as though distance itself has grown larger to carry them. You pause at the corner tower and set the lantern on the parapet for a moment while you flex your fingers. From here you can see the roadside shrine that stands some distance from the bridge, only a pale block in the dark with a tinier pale cross above it. Old Mera's faceless dead man, if he ever existed, has not chosen to parade by it tonight. Still, some swear shrines are busiest in weather like this, when souls, saints, and all manner of uncertain presences dislike open roads and gather where prayer has been pinned to the earth. Others say that is exactly why one should nod toward a shrine when passing after dark, but never stare too long, in case something nods back. Medieval advice is very thorough when it comes to making darkness feel occupied. The older watchman joins you after a while, his own lantern shuttered low. Anything he asks. River, owl, bells, Whetstone resented me. He nods as though this is an acceptable report. Beside you. He leans his forearms on the parapet and peers outward. His beard stirs in the wind. Best kind of night, he says. Quiet. Then, quiet enough that the mind begins providing decorations. That is the difficulty of the wall after the gates are shut. By day your attention is fed constantly by faces and questions. By night, with only darkness before you, the imagination starts doing extra work. A branch becomes a crouched figure until it sways the right way in wind. Water catching moonless light becomes movement. A pale stone near the road looks for one breath like a hooded man kneeling, then becomes only a stone again when you shift half a step. Even now, it is hard to tell whether the eye is a poor servant in darkness or simply too eager to be useful. The older watchman, perhaps reading some of that from your posture, and says, "If you see a thing twice, look a third time before naming it. Was that taught to you by a captain? By my mother. That sounds more reliable." He tells you then, as you walk on together, about a watchman he knew years ago who swore he saw lanterns moving below the wall one winter midnight, 2 lights weaving where no road ran. He roused half the garrison, only for them to discover marsh gas flickering over bog ground beyond the willow stand. Some laughed for months. Some did not laugh at all, because they had seen lights in marshes too and preferred not to give them names. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether such wandering flames are natural vapours, souls not at rest, or devils with a sense of comedy. In practice, sensible men avoid bogs after dark and let philosophers suffer the explanation. At the next stretch of parapet, the wind carries up a stronger thread of village smoke and something else as well. Frying fat, perhaps, or cabbage from the lower houses, supper lingering in the air. There is comfort even in other people's meals. You think, too, of the family admitted at dusk, the woman with the feverish child and the wagon wheel half ready to betray them. Somewhere down there in the village they are perhaps by a hearth now, the child unwrapped, the horse rubbed down. The hens offended in a corner, the brother still inventing explanations for why he said carpenter instead of cooper. A gatekeeper learns to imagine the continuations of those he admits, not all of them, only some. The ones who arrive with the weather still clinging to them seem to stay in the mind longest. You stop again and look back across the inner ward. The chapel lamp still glows. Perhaps the suspicious monk is there yet, showing the chaplain his little silver fitting by candlelight, comparing pattern to pattern, while outside on the wall you compare shadow to shadow. Strange, the different forms of keeping. One man guards relics, another accounts, another horses, another doors. One of the lesser truths of castles is that everyone is a keeper of something, usually damp and rarely thanked. A sound reaches you then from below the outer wall, soft, scraping, then a little splash. You raise the lantern, shielding the flame with your hand, and both you and the older watchman lean outward slightly. The ditch water moves near a clump of reeds. Another scrape. Then a shape detaches itself from the shadow and scurries along the bank. Fox, he says. You see it clearly enough now, a low red-brown shape with tail darkened by wet, nosing among rushes for mice or frogs or any creature slower than itself. It pauses once to look up, eyes catching the lantern as 2 brief sparks, then slips away under the bridge with complete disregard for lordly boundaries. There goes half the poultry in the lower village, says the older watchman, if the hens haven't organised against him. He makes a sound like a quiet laugh, then moves on toward the tower corner again, leaving you your own stretch of wall. The hours ahead will not race. They will gather like wool in the dark, a circuit, a pause, a breath of wind, a bell, another circuit, the lantern warmed in your hand, boots numbing, thoughts loosening into that odd clear fog that belongs only to night watch. But for now the castle rests around you, shut and holding. The road lies empty. The river keeps breathing. Somewhere an owl speaks once from the trees. And you walk the wall between the warm life within and the cold old dark beyond, carrying your little lantern like a promise that the boundary still holds. The night deepens not all at once, but by quiet degrees, each one small enough to miss if you're not standing awake inside it. The damp gleam on the parapet dulls. The village lights below grow fewer as shutters close and hearths are banked. The sky, which earlier held a little texture of cloud, turns into one broad, dark cloth stretched over field and river alike. Even the bells seem farther away now, as though the world has folded extra distance into itself since Vespers. This is the hour when warmth feels like a remembered thing, and sleep begins tugging at the body from somewhere behind the eyes. You pace the wall with the lantern hanging low in your hand, its warmth slight but welcome against your stiff fingers. The stone beneath your boots is colder now than it was an hour ago. Damp has turned to a fine skin of chill, not quite frost, not yet, but enough to make each step sound a little sharper. Wind noses through the embrasures and slips under your cloak with impolite persistence. Somewhere below, tucked in the angle where wall meets tower, water continues dripping from the day's rain in slow, measured taps. In a quiet night, even dripping can start to sound deliberate. This is the dangerous part of the watch, not because enemies choose it especially, though some might, but because the body begins making suggestions. Sit a moment. Lean a little longer on the parapet. Close your eyes only until the wind shifts. Medieval labour is full of endurance, but Night Watch asks for a peculiar kind. You must resist not pain exactly, but heaviness. You must stay friendly enough with drowsiness to recognise it, and stern enough not to let it in. The older watchman has taken the tower corner again, where he says the wind is easier to read. Perhaps it is. Perhaps he simply likes having stone at his back and two directions to look from. The younger guard passes below in the gate passage and calls softly upward that the brazier still holds. You answer, and your own voice sounds strange in the night, smaller than it did by day, as though darkness trims sound before returning it. You make another circuit. At the northern stretch of wall, where the ground below dips towards scrub and wet meadow, you stop and listen. There is the river's low murmur, farther off now beneath the wind. There is the occasional rustle of something small in the reeds. There is the distant complaint of an owl, and then, for a moment, another sound, thin, wavering, almost like a woman singing far beyond the fields. You hold still. The sound comes again, or nearly again, but this time it breaks halfway through into something rougher, more awkward, and abruptly less ghostly. A fox. Of course. Foxes have a gift for sounding like old sorrow given a throat. Some swear hearing one cry near midnight means a death in the village before morning. Others say it means only that the fox has found no hen and is bitter about it. Those who tell the tale never fully agree, though they all lower their voices a little when speaking of it. You watch the dark scrub for movement but see none. The cry fades. The night closes over it as water closes over a tossed pebble. You draw your cloak tighter and continue. Below, in the courtyard, almost all is still now. One window in the hall remains lit, probably where servants clear trestles and scrape trenches into pails for dogs and pigs to dispute later. A stable lantern moves once, then vanishes. The chapel lamp persists, tiny and steady, a faint gold seed in the dark. You think again of the monk and his bundled chapel fitting, of the chaplain bending close over silver-gilt filigree, comparing patterns by candlelight while herbs for a sick child waited in a pouch beside holy business. It seems oddly fitting that sacred things and practical remedies should travel together. In this world they often do. A saint's relic in one pocket, angelica root in the other, and a prayer stretched between them. At the next turn of the wall, you pause to rub warmth back into your hands. Your palm catches on the little splinter from the gate beam that you never removed. It has worked itself deeper, the sly thing. You set the lantern on a merlon top and pick at it with your knife tip as carefully as the cold allows. A bead of blood wells up when the splinter finally comes free, absurdly small for the annoyance it has caused. You suck the spot clean, tasting iron. Somewhere in the village below a dog barks once, then twice, then thinks better of it. Another answers from farther off, then silence again. The dogs below the walls know the territory of night better than any steward. They bark at foxes, strangers, drunken men, swaying head shadows, and occasionally nothing that human eyes can confirm. There are people who trust a dog's bark more than a priest's blessing, which may be unfair to priests but not entirely irrational. A flicker moves near the lower road. You turn at once, lantern lifted. For one breath it seems exactly what a troubled mind might make of it, a wandering light, low to the ground, wavering where no proper lantern ought to be. Marsh fire, spirit lamp, a soul with unfinished errands. Even now, tired as you are, your stomach tightens before reason arrives. You step to the parapet edge and narrow your eyes. The light bobs once more, then splits briefly in two. Not spirit lamps. A man with a hooded lantern, and beside him another carrying a bundle of sticks tipped with ember or resin. Villagers, then, taking some path between houses or perhaps heading to a byre where an animal labours badly. Night work does happen, though everyone pretends it should not. The lights move behind a hedge and vanish, then reappear nearer a cottage and are swallowed by a doorway. You let out a breath through your nose. This is how unease works on the wall, not as terror, but as a series of tiny offerings. Here is a light, here is a cry, here is a scrape in the ditch. Would you like to make more of it than is wise? No, thank you, you think. Still, you understand why people do. Deep night encourages interpretation. In the day, a man sees a bent willow and thinks willow. At midnight, with a wet wind and tired bones, he sees a woman with hair over her face, or a penitent saint, or the ghost of a laundress who drowned in spring flood and still seeks her linen. Medieval people, like all people, are excellent at decorating uncertainty. The older watchman comes along the parapet toward you, rolling one shoulder as he walks. Anything. Fox. Village lights. My imagination applying for a promotion. He nods. Decline it. You fall into step together for a little while. This too helps in the deepest hours. Another person's boots on stone, another breath smoking in the dark, another mind to keep yours from wandering too far down old tales. He tells you, in that quiet late watch tone that invites story without waking the whole castle, about a gatehouse in his youth where a lantern was seen floating outside the ditch 3 nights running. On the 4th night the captain went out with 3 men and found not a ghost but a stolen cowbell hung from a branch and swaying in the wind, catching moonlight on the metal. Who hung it there, you ask? No one knew. Boys, most likely, or a shepherd with humour, and the lantern never was one. Just moon on brass. You smile, though not much. Disappointing. Only if you prefer ghosts to boys. Some nights I might. He grunts approval. The 2 of you stop at the tower corner, looking outward over fields now fully merged with the dark. The sky has cleared a little at last, enough for a few stars to show between slow-moving tatters of cloud. They are sharp and cold above the black land. People read much into stars as well, weather, birth, plague, divine temper, the success of journeys, the character of children. Some swear that a star seen low and red over wet ground means fever in cattle. Others say stars mind their own affairs and wise men should do the same. It is hard to tell which opinion is more medieval. The older watchman leaves you again after a time, taking the far tower. You continue alone. The lantern swings gently. The parapet stones keep their cold. Sleep presses once more at the edges of thought, but the night itself has a hold on you now, stern and strangely clean. Owl, fox, dog, village light, chapel lamp, river breath, wet stone, one star, then another. The world narrows until each small thing seems sufficient. And in these deepest hours before dawn, when every creak and wandering light asks to be mistaken for an omen, you keep walking, keep looking, and keep the boundary firm with nothing grander than wakefulness. At some hour too late to feel like night and too early to feel like morning, the cold sharpens. It does not rush in with drama. It settles more deeply into the stone, creeps across the parapet, whitens the edge of breath, and turns every iron fitting you touch into a quiet insult. This is the leanest part of the watch, when the body has spent its first stubbornness and dawn is still only a rumour. Yet the world begins, very faintly, to change again, not brighten, not yet, but tighten toward morning. You descend from the wall walk when it's time to tend the bridge and gate fittings before the day can think about opening. The stair feels steeper on the way down, and the lantern flame trembles as you move, painting brief gold arcs across damp stone. In the passage below, the brazier has burned to a red core beneath ash. The younger guard, wrapped in his cloak on the bench, is awake in the dignified manner of someone who has absolutely not been nodding, and will fight any witness who suggests otherwise. The dog lifts his head, yawns magnificently enough to display a full theology of teeth, and rises to follow you as if this next labour were his idea. The great doors remain shut, the beam dark across them, the bolts seated firm. They look heavier by night than they ever do by day, as though darkness itself has weight and leans on them from outside. You rest one hand on the oak for a moment and feel cold seeping through the grain. Beyond it lies the drawbridge, raised and slick with the night's damp, and beyond that the road, the ditch, the fields, the waiting world. First comes the brazier. You stir its ash with the iron rod and add a little charcoal and a scrap of split wood from the dry stack under the stair. Flame wakes reluctantly, then catches with a low glow. The dog noses closer at once and settles beside it with the practical devotion of a creature who understands fire better than philosophy. The younger guard stands and stretches until his shoulders creak audibly. Any more ghosts, he asks. Only foxes masquerading above their station. A common offence. You hand him the lantern and take up the smaller keyring for the inner locking points. Morning opening begins long before the doors move. There are pegs to test, sockets to clear, a wedge to loosen at the chain housing, the side postern latch to inspect in case damp has swelled the wood again. You work by touch as much as sight now. Habit guides the hand. A gatekeeper learns the shape of metal in darkness, the precise resistance that means a bolt is merely cold rather than stuck. The sound of a chain resting well instead of straining wrong. Outside, unseen beyond the door, frost is beginning to gather. You know it before you see it because the iron feels different and the air slipping through the gap smells cleaner, emptier, with that brittle edge that comes just before first light on a freezing morning. The younger guard unbars the little shutter slit in the wicket door and peers out. White on the bridge, he says. Of course. After rain, then clearing, then night cold. The kind of sequence that makes timber slick, rope stiff, and men curse softly into their sleeves. You open the slit yourself and look through. The outer face of the raised bridge has taken on a faint pale dusting where water froze in the grain. The chains gleam dimly with it. Beyond, the road is a darker stripe through whitening verge grass. You close the slit and fetch the salt bucket. This is one of the less sung duties of a medieval gatekeeper, not defying siege towers, but flinging salt and sand on bridge boards before dawn, so that the first cart does not skid sideways into history. Practical heroism rarely receives a lute. The older watchman joins you then, beard rimed with tiny white at the edges where his breath has frozen and thawed. He takes one look at the bucket in your hand and says, "Good. I was hoping for elegance." Together you begin the first part of lowering the bridge. The younger guard tends the release while you and the older man brace at the mechanism. The chains wake with a hard metallic complaint, sharper than last evening's groan. Frost makes everything sound less forgiving. Slowly, carefully, the catches ease. The bridge descends by degrees, its weight shifting through chain and timber in a rhythm you feel in your shoulders before you hear it in your ears. When the outer end meets the ground again with a muffled thud, a scatter of whitened droplets shakes loose from the boards. You carry the salt and sand mixture across it at once, boots scraping. The surface is slick as a promise from a tax collector. You spread the grit in broad arcs, watching it darken the pale frost. The dog pads behind as far as the cold boards allow, then decides supervision is best performed from the threshold. The countryside before dawn is a strange kingdom. Shapes are present but not fully born: the roadside shrine, the ditch reeds, the dark hump of the mill track, the village roofs below still tucked under darkness, each chimney giving only the faintest hint of smoke. No birds yet, no wheels, no voices. Somewhere far off, a single cock crows too early, convinced he commands the sun. Medieval roosters are famous for this sort of confidence. As you work, the older watchman checks the bridge chains, running one gloved hand down the links and pausing at the repaired band the smith meant to replace before midsummer. Frost outlines the hammer marks there in white, making the old repair look newly made for a moment. Still holding, he says, like all of us. That is a lower standard than I prefer in iron. You grin into your collar and move to inspect the hinge pins on the outer gate face. Now that the bridge is down, the world smells of frozen mud, river breath, and distant smoke beginning at last to rise from one or two village hearths. Your fingers ache through the gloves when you touch the iron straps. At the bottom corner of one gate leaf you find a little rime gathered where damp settled in the night. You scrape it away with the butt of your knife and smear a touch of grease into the hinge. The tallow stiff but workable once your thumb warms it. Some swear frost that forms thickest on the hinge side means visitors before noon. Others say it means nothing except poor drainage. The practical and the superstitious live shoulder to shoulder here, muttering at each other over every stain and season. Even now, it is hard to tell whether people cling to such signs because they truly believe them, or because the world before sunrise feels too empty unless it is sending messages. Back inside the passage, you clear the threshold groove where yesterday's rushes, mud, and stray straw have compacted into a dark line. If the wicket drags here later, the whole opening takes on the ill temper of a door offended before breakfast. You sweep it clean with a stiff broom, then shake fresh dry rushes from a basket onto the stone near the inner side, where feet will first tramp in from the cold. Their scent rises green and sharp, absurdly lively in the frosty air. The younger guard has climbed to the chamber above and now calls down that the east shows a little silver beyond the woods. You step out to the bridge once more and look. Yes, not sunrise, only its warning. The black of the trees has eased into charcoal, and above them the sky holds the faintest paling, enough to separate land from air. One by one the ordinary sounds of life prepare themselves. A second cock crows. From the stable yard behind you comes the thud of a bucket and the sleepy complaint of a horse. Somewhere a woman coughs indoors. The chapel bell has not yet rung, but you feel the castle leaning toward waking. You remember then the family from dusk and glance down toward the village. A thread of smoke rises from one of the lower roofs more steadily than the rest. Perhaps theirs, perhaps not. The child with the fever may be cooler now under blankets by some cousin's hearth. Or not. A gatekeeper never gets all endings. You open, you admit, you close, and much of what follows belongs to other fires. The older watchman shoulders the bar from its rest point where it will soon be lifted clear. Another day, he says. So it appears. The dog sneezes at the cold, which is as good a blessing as any. Above you, the sky whitens a little more. Frost clings to the drawbridge edges, to the chain links, to the grass near the ditch, to the shrine by the road. The whole threshold seems outlined for a brief while in pale breath and silver dust. It is beautiful in a hard, unwelcoming way, like many things worth keeping. And as the first real hint of a morning settles over the bridge, the gate, and your numbed hands, you stand among oak, iron, frost, and habit, preparing to turn the castle outward once more. The first bell does not so much break the night as persuade it to loosen its grip. It rings from the chapel within the walls, small at first in the cold air, then clearer as the sound gathers itself and moves through stone, timber, frost, and waking bodies. Prime, or near enough. The castle stirs in answer. A shutter opens somewhere above with a dry knock. A servant crosses the yard with the yoke and pails, head down, breath pale. From the stables comes the restless shifting of horses who have heard grain before they have seen it. Smoke rises from the kitchen vents in steadier strands now, carrying the scent of damp wood taking flame, oats, and the first onions going into a pot. You stand in the gate passage with one hand on the great bar, the younger guard ready at the wickets and catches, the older watchman beside the bridge mechanism, and the dog planted near the brazier as though he supervises sunrise by hereditary right. The cold has not relented. It has merely become more visible. Frost pearls along the iron straps, whitens the outer edge of the drawbridge, and lies in the threshold grooves where yesterday's water settled. The fresh rushes you scattered on the inner side of the passage glow faintly green in the torchlight, brave and temporary. Opening the castle again always feels slightly different after a long night. Not merely because your bones have stiffened or because your fingers complain around the iron. It is because the whole place has spent the dark hours turned inward, all prayer, blankets, hearths, sleeping faces, and quiet breathing behind oak doors. Morning asks it to face outward again, to trade safety for duty, to admit the road, the weather, the coins, the gossip, the carts, the unexpected. It is a small daily act of courage, though no one calls it that because courage sounds more impressive with banners attached. You lift the bar with the older watchman, each of you finding the smooth-worn places by habit. The beam comes up heavier than it has any right to feel. Perhaps it is the cold. Perhaps it is always this heavy and daylight simply lies about it. You guide the left end from its socket, then the right, and together you ease it back onto its brackets. The younger guard moves at once to the upper catches, freeing them one by one. Iron clicks, wood shifts, breath smokes white in the passage. When the wicket door opens first, the air that enters is knife clean and smells of frost, river mist, and distant chimney smoke. You step out to the bridge and look along the road. It lies pale-edged now, dark mud bordered by stiff silver grass. The shrine by the roadside has a cap of white on its little roof. Beyond it the woods are no longer black, only deep grey, and above them the eastern sky has taken on a colour like watered milk. The lower village is waking too. A woman comes from one cottage with a bucket. A man crosses a yard carrying split wood. A dog trots along a fence line with the grave urgency of a creature who has remembered somewhere important to be. At one roof, the smoke rises more thickly than at the rest, and you think again of the family admitted at dusk, of the child warm beneath blankets. No one can quite agree whether a gatekeeper's memory should hold only those who pass under his arch, or whether it naturally reaches after their mornings too. Either way, yours does. The older watchman lowers the bridge fully and checks the chain run while you walk the boards once more, scattering another little scrape of sand where frost still clings in the grain. The younger guard follows with the broom, clearing the last of the night's debris from the threshold stones. This, too, is the Lord's peace, not speeches, not decrees, but boards salted before dawn and muck swept aside so feet may pass safely. From behind you comes the smell of warm bread. A kitchen boy is hurrying through the yard with a basket covered in cloth, moving as only boys with hot food and strict instructions can move fast enough to seem useful, slow enough not to drop anything that will later be counted. The scent catches you and stays. Hunger arrives afresh, even though you thought the night had worn it away. The day's first arrival appears sooner than you expect. It is not a cart, nor a merchant, nor a servant with excuses. It is the village reeve himself climbing the road from below, hood up, boots wet to the ankle, carrying under one arm a short staff and under the other a wrapped bundle that looks like parchment or perhaps cloth. He is a broad, careful man with cheeks weathered red and a beard that never seems entirely combed, as if governance in the lower village leaves no time for vanities but many opportunities for mud. You let him cross the bridge without challenge beyond the usual nod. He is one of the few men who belong to both sides of the threshold in a practical sense. Village and castle meet often through him taxes, repairs, disputes, wandering pigs, broken hedges, missing hens, winter grain, and all the other matters by which order quietly survives. Early, you say. Not early enough, he replies, which is the reeve's natural condition. Up close, the bundle beneath his arm proves to be a sheaf of account tallies wrapped in cloth against the damp, along with one smaller parchment tied in red thread. For the steward, he says, lifting the sheaf, then he taps the smaller one, and one from the cooper below. Says the family that came in last night did find him after all. So you were right to think of them. The child. Feverish, but cooler by cockcrow. The woman sent thanks to whichever gate hand let them through. She says she would have blessed your boots if she knew whose they were. The older watchman snorts. Tell her to bless the wheel instead. The reeve's face nearly smiles, though reeves are careful with such extravagance. It's split outright once they reach the lane, so perhaps she should. That is how news travels back to a threshold not in grand announcements, but tucked into morning tallies between matters of cask measures and hedge rights, a child cooler, a wheel broken, a gate decision justified by the next hour's reality. You take in the little comfort of it without ceremony. A keeper of doors does not often receive proof that the small mercies mattered. When it comes, it sits quietly. The reeve stamps his boots and glances out over the bridge. Road's hard with frost near the mill. Might be more slow carts this morning. Then they may complain in an orderly line, as is the custom. He passes under the arch and into the yard, already half turned toward whatever fresh disagreement awaits him between village needs and castle expectations. Everyone at a place like this seems to spend the day translating one form of trouble into another. Soon after him comes a milk girl with 2 covered pails, cheeks raw from the cold and shawl tied so tight beneath her chin that her words come out pressed thin. Then a woodcutter with a donkey laden in split billets, one bundle marked for the kitchens another for sale. Then a thin novice from the priory with ink still at his cuffs and a packet tucked under his sleeve for the chaplain. Faces again. Morning faces, which differ from evening ones. Less guarded, often more raw. More likely to tell the truth accidentally before the day teaches caution back into them. And as they come, you find yourself thinking not in words exactly, but in the slow inward way that long duty teaches about what it is you keep here. Not glory, not battle, not even secrecy, most days. You keep sequence, permission, rhythm. The clean fact that there is an inside and an outside, and that crossing from one to the other ought to mean something. You keep the memory of who entered in rain, who arrived with goods, who limped with a lame horse, who carried letters, who looked too often over his shoulder, who thanked you only after being admitted. You keep a boundary not merely of stone but of notice. The lord in his chamber might call it security, the steward might call it management, the chaplain, if pressed, would probably call it stewardship of a temporal threshold and then feel pleased with himself. But standing here with frost melting on the bridge, smoke rising from kitchens, and the day's first villagers bringing milk, wood, ink, and complaints, you know it more simply. You are the keeper of the castle's quiet edge. Outside lies the restless world weather, trade, rumour, road dust, sickness, need, prayer, wandering monks, children with badges, geese with opinions, and all the untidy traffic of living. Inside lies another untidy world, but one gathered, named, and sheltered by walls. Between them stands this gate, these oak leaves, these chains, these iron keys, these habits of opening and closing, and you with your cold hands and patient eyes. The bell rings again from the chapel. Bread smell thickens from the kitchens. A cart is already visible farther down the road, moving slowly through the pale, brightening day. The dog shakes himself, circles once by the brazier, and settles with the confidence of a creature entirely certain the castle will continue because he is present, and you, standing beneath the arch as frost loosens and morning widens, understand at last that the duty has never been small just because it is quiet. By the time the sun finally finds the tops of the outer trees, it is too weak and too winter-thin to warm anything, but it lays a pale gold along the upper stones of the gatehouse and turns the last frost on the bridge into a brief sparkle before it gives up and becomes water. Morning has properly taken hold now. The castle is awake in full. Servants cross the yard with baskets, buckets, and the focused expressions of people who have already been given 2 instructions too many. The kitchens send out waves of sent bread, onions, broth, a little smoke from wood that was never quite dry enough. From the stables comes the steady work of currying, harnessing, muttering, and one horse stamping as though it personally objects to the existence of labour. Above it all the chapel bell has rung twice more, and each note seems less lonely now that daylight bears it. You remain at the gate. That is the truth of it. The day changes, the watch ends, the night recedes, yet still you remain at the gate, not because no one can relieve you eventually, though that matters, and not because the work is grand, though it has proved deeper than it first appeared. You remain because the threshold never ceases being a threshold. Even once the doors are open and the bridge is down and the first carts have passed under the arch, the duty continues in quieter shapes. A castle does not keep itself merely by having walls. It keeps itself because somebody notices who crosses them, and why, and in what condition. A cart of firewood arrives next, the billets stacked neatly enough to suggest either pride or a wife with strong opinions. You question the driver, nod, and let him pass. Then comes a mason's helper with lime under his nails and one sleeve dusted white, sent to inspect a crack near the outer bakehouse. Then a woman with a basket of eels covered in damp cloth. Then a clerk's boy carrying a packet sealed for the steward and walking with the tragic carefulness of someone entrusted with parchment before breakfast. One by one they come. One by one you weigh them and wave them through. The Reeves message about the family lingers pleasantly in your thoughts. The child cooler. The wheel broken only after safety was reached. A small proof that last night's judgment mattered. Medieval life rarely pauses to congratulate anyone, so such moments must be kept privately, like a good coal under ash. You do not speak of it to the younger guard, who is now trying to scrape mud from the threshold groove with a seriousness normally reserved for military campaigns. You do not mention it to the older watchman, who would only say that one fortunate result does not mean all late arrivals deserve softness. He would be right, too. Gates are not held by softness, but neither are they held by hardness alone. The monk from yesterday appears again just before mid-morning, this time from within rather than without. He comes down the yard with the chaplain beside him, the black robe now dry, the folds brushed, the wooden case under his arm once more. In daylight he looks less suspicious and more merely scholarly, which is another common condition among monks. The chaplain, a narrow man with a nose like a judgment and fingers permanently yellowed by candle wax and old parchment, seems almost cheerful. Almost. The comparison was useful, he tells you, which is close enough to gratitude from such a man. The prior's fitting is older than we thought. Western work. Likely. 12th century, perhaps. Did it solve anything, you ask? The chaplain considers. It clarified several confusions. Which is clergy language for no, but in an interesting way. The monk lowers his head politely. His herb pouch is gone, you notice. Presumably delivered to the child beyond the mill, or someone equally in need. His expression is easier than yesterday, though fatigue still sits in the corners of it. You were right to search me, he says. That is gracious, and inconveniently so. It is always easier when people resent being searched. Their indignation lets you keep your own certainty neat. Gratitude complicates things. You were right to bring everything honestly in the end. You answer. He accepts that with a small smile. The chaplain, meanwhile, seems ready to return to his books and his relic cloths, having spent sufficient time in weather. Before they part, the monk reaches into his sleeve and draws out a small strip of woven wool. For your hand, he says. Around the palm, if the splinter cut is troublesome. It has been blessed. You look at the strip. Blue and white thread. Simple. Clean. A charm. A bandage. A prayer in textile form, perhaps all three. Some swear a blessed binding keeps corruption from a wound. Others say clean cloth and luck do the work while the blessing takes the credit. No one can quite agree. You take it anyway. Thank you. The monk inclines his head and departs through the gate, out onto the brightening road, smaller with every step until he becomes simply another dark figure moving away between frost-dark verges. The chaplain watches him go for a moment, then says, as if to himself, most errors begin as confidence. Then he turns back toward the chapel with that useful sentence trailing behind him like incense. It stays with you. Most errors begin as confidence. There is a gatekeeper's truth in that. The cart you wave through too quickly. The story you accept because it sounds tidy. The bolt you assume will slide true because it always has. The bridge you do not salt because the air does not feel cold enough yet. Duty here is not made from certainty. It is made from attention. And perhaps that is what you've learned in this long cycle from dark to dark, that the quiet duties of a castle gatekeeper are not lesser because no trumpet names them. They are simply closer to the grain of ordinary life. You keep watch over wood swelling in damp weather, over iron stiffening in frost, over clipped coins, monkish bundles, gooseboys, tired mothers, reeves with tally cloths, children carrying saints against coughs, merchants hiding honey, dogs negotiating jurisdiction, and every other humble matter by which a stronghold remains a stronghold rather than a pile of stone with ambitions. The day continues around you, but a softer feeling has settled in your chest now, not exactly pride, not exactly relief, more like understanding. A lord may own the walls, a steward may count the dues, a chaplain may name the relics and pray over the thresholds. But you are the one who feels the doors through the seasons. You know which hinge speaks first in rain, which traveller types arrive at dusk, which village child lies badly, which dog belongs to nobody and therefore to the whole place. You know the smell of wet rushes and hot pottage, of beeswax and chain grease, of frosted oak and stable smoke. You know how the castle sounds when sleeping, when waking, when closing itself, when breathing out again into morning. That knowledge is not glory, but it is possession of a kind, quiet possession, faithful possession, the sort earned only by repetition. As the sun climbs a little higher, the wet on the bridge finally dries in patches. The last silver edge fades from the roadside shrine. A hawk wheels far above the outer field. Someone in the yard laughs. Someone else swears at a bucket. The dog stretches by the brazier and wanders out to inspect a promising smell near the gatepost. The younger guard is relieved at last and stumbles off towards sleep with the slightly offended face of a man whose bed has kept him waiting. The older watchman remains a little longer, leaning near the arch and looking outward with the old patient gaze of someone who has spent enough years at gates to measure time by hinges and weather, rather than by calendars. "It goes on," he says. "Yes." He nods once. That is all. The perfect summary of most medieval occupations. And because the cycle does go on, because another dusk will come, another bridge will rise, another family may arrive late, another monk may carry some holy confusion in a wrapped cloth, you understand that this morning is not an ending in the grand sense. It is only the point at which weariness becomes gentler, and the world, having been kept through the dark, may now be trusted to continue under light. So at last, as your watch truly loosens and another pair of hands prepares to take what remains of the day, you step back a little from the arch and let the castle breathe without all its weight pressing through your shoulders. The sounds soften. The bright parts of the morning blur at their edges. The bells seem farther off again, though they still ring. Smoke rises in calm grey ribbons. Sun lies thin and harmless on stone. The road beyond the bridge no longer asks questions. It simply waits, as roads always do, patient beneath the passing of boots and carts and weather. And now the long wind down of the day begins inside you. Even as the castle keeps moving, you let your shoulders ease. You let the cold leave your fingers one slow degree at a time. You think of the half-burned candle above the passage, the wet wool steaming by the hearth, the little blue and white strip of blessed cloth folded now into your palm, the child cooler by dawn, the dog by the brazier, the smell of bread from the kitchens, the owl in the trees, the fox at the ditch, the bridge silvered with frost, the bar falling into place in the night, the bells threading the hours together. The whole world of the gate grows quieter in your mind. The oak doors are no longer only weight and labour, but warm dark shapes resting in their frame. The iron is no longer bitter cold, but still and trustworthy. The road is only a ribbon fading into mist. The village below is only smoke, rooftops, and distant hearths. The chapel lamp is only a small and faithful star behind stone, and you, who have stood between outer dark and inner fire, no longer need to hold every sound so sharply. You can let them soften now, let the cartwheels roll away, let the voices blur, let the bells become gentle, let the watchfires sink to embers, let the old walls keep their own counsel. In the castle, blankets are being shaken out, bowls are being rinsed, straw is being turned. A priest bends over a page, a cook wipes flour from her hands. A stable lad leans against a warm flank for one stolen moment of rest. Somewhere in the lower village, a child sleeps cooler beneath wool. Somewhere on the road, a monk walks with his case and his prayers. Somewhere under the bridge, a fox curls into itself and dreams of hens. And here at the threshold, where all things paused before passing on, there is nothing left to do but feel the warmth returning, the day dimming at its edges, and the great quiet kindness of being done for now. The stone is old, the fire is low, the world is held, and the darkness, when it comes again, will not be lonely.